6th of February 2025. Please remember, as usual, to speak into your microphones as the meeting is being webcast. I hope you'll have seen that I've sent invitations out for tea at Hertford Castle on Sunday the 16th of March. It should be a really lovely event. It includes a tour of the castle, including the dungeon, so it's quite fun. I hope some of you will be able to join me and raise some funds for chips. Tonight's agenda is very full, and I'd like to remind you of our meeting processes. In asking questions in item 8, would members please keep to the preamble to a minimum, and once our exec member has replied, only ask a supplementary question, and this will help to ensure that all questions are answered. And also to remind you that in each item, members should only speak once. We will monitor this and try to ensure that we have time for everyone who wishes to speak. Thank you. So over to Councillor Crystal for our leaders' announcement.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome everyone tonight. It's good to see a good turnout. I'm sure many of you will be aware that that our head of operations, Jess Cannon-Metterman, left the council last week after more than 8 years here, during which time she ensured the delivery of council operations from waste collection and parking, parks and open spaces, and she was heavily involved in the delivery of Grange Paddocks Leisure Centre, the extension and refurb at Hartham Leisure Centre, the reconstruction of Hertford Theatre to create Beam, and oversaw the new waste contract and the parking strategy, which I believe we're talking about later. She returned from maternity leave last year, but has decided to spend her time with her family, two young children, while they're young, which is very brave in my opinion, but I'm sure lovely. And I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking her and sending her all our best wishes in her new head of operations role at home. I'd also like to welcome our new commercial and cultural development manager for Beam, Steve Sargent, who started in January. He comes to us with a huge amount of experience and skills from many years in strategic development within arts and cultural organisations elsewhere. So if you get the chance, do go and pop into Beam and say hello to him. In fact, Councillor Sarah Hopewell and I recently met up with Steve to receive a plaque marking an architectural award from Hertford Civic Society for the new Beam building. They also gave the council an award for the Hartham Leisure Centre extension. So on the council's behalf, I'm sure on behalf of all of us, I'd like to pass on a huge thanks to the Civic Society for those awards. Lastly, Councillor Miney Goldspink has sent her apologies tonight due to family illness, and on behalf of the council, I want to send her all our best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yep, we've received apologies for absence from councillors Ruth Buckmaster, Goldspink, Deffley and McAndrew.
So item 4, the minutes from the 11th of December 2024. Do we have any amendments or comments on those minutes? No? Okay, fantastic. So do we have a proposer to accept those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And a seconder? Councillor Hill? Councillor Burt, thank you. So could we vote to approve those minutes? All those in favour? And those against? And any abstentions? 2. Thank you. That's carried. Item 5, are there any declarations of interest? That's fantastic. Item 6, petitions. No petitions have been submitted. So item 7, we move on to public questions, which can be found pages 13 and 14. 2 questions have been submitted. May I remind members of the public that both the questioner and responding executive member must ensure that the question and the reply is succinct. The total time allowed for consideration of questions submitted shall not exceed 15 minutes. And given that we now publish the full responses a day after this meeting, short verbal responses are encouraged so we can keep to the time limit. So may I invite Parish Councillor Duncan Wallace to ask his question.
Thank you, Chair. And I represent Bunterford Town Council.
Thank you.
The constitution of the Development Management Committee, or DMC, specifically states at point 15.11.7 Members should make sure that if they are proposing, seconding or supporting a decision contrary to officer recommendations or the development plan, that they clearly identify and understand the planning reasons, which is underlined, leading to this conclusion or decision. Be aware that members may have to justify the resulting decision by giving evidence in the event of any challenge. With this excerpt in mind, what is the role of the DMC and its elected members? What direction is given to officers to ensure they give their support to the elected members who wish to vote against officer recommendations, enabling them to represent the wishes of their constituents and seek to protect their communities by managing growth responsibly, with objective, balanced considerations and without bias? This would be more achievable if the District Council could demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply which would enable development plans to carry the weight for which they were created, thus removing obvious conflict between officers and elected members, which was very evident at DMC in November 2024 and January 2025, thus promoting the democratic process and role of DMC to one of respected importance and responsibility in which the public can have confidence, not one which appears submissive in totality to predetermined recommendations.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Glover will respond.
Thank you. The Development Management Committee, DMC, has to operate in compliance with planning law. This planning law requires that decisions made on planning applications be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. As such, any refusal of planning permission must be justified against the development plan and these other material considerations. When this has been tested in law, the courts have expressed the view that a DMC committee reasons for a planning application decision should be clear and convincing. Officer reports are an important part of the decision-making process, but they have to be professional, so must be accurate and include substance of any objections and other responses received as part of the consultation. If the report's recommendation is contrary to the provisions of the development plan, as was the case at DMC in November and January, the material considerations which justify the departure must be clearly stated. This is not only good practice, but if it is not done, then the failure to do so may constitute maladministration or give rise to a judicial review on the grounds that the decision was not taken in accordance with the provisions of the development plan and the council's statutory duties. Planning committees can, of course, make decisions which are different from an officer recommendation. Normally, this decision by the DMC will reflect a difference in the assessment of how a policy has been complied with, or a set of different weightings have been attributed to the material considerations. If a councillor on DMC is concerned about an officer recommendation, good practice is set out in the Local Government Association guidance document, Probity in Planning, December 2019. This document says that members should discuss their areas of difference and the underpinning reasons for that difference with officers in advance of the committee meeting. Such discussions need to be carefully handled to ensure that this does not lead to predetermination on a decision. If the planning committee makes a decision contrary to the officer's recommendation, a detailed minute of the committee's reasons has to be made. And the only way this can be done is if councillors are prepared to explain their full planning reasons for not agreeing with the officer's recommendation, which should be set in the context of the development plan or the MPPF. The officer should also be given an opportunity to explain the implications of the contrary decision, including an assessment of a likely appeal outcome based on policies set out in the development plan and the MPPF, and chances of a successful award of costs against the local authority should one be applied for. Section 15 of the Council's Constitution provides information on members' planning code of practice, and this explains that members should recognise and respect that officers involved in the processing and determination of planning matters must act in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct for officers and their professional codes of conduct, primarily the Royal Town Planning Institute Code of Professional Conduct. The Royal Town Planning Institute Code of Conduct requires, amongst other matters, that their members exercise fearlessly and impartially their independent professional judgment to the best of their skill and understanding, and that they must also act with honesty and integrity. As a result, planning officers' views, opinions and recommendations will be presented on the basis of their overriding obligation of professional independence, which may be at odds with the views, opinions or decisions of the committee or its members. Officers can offer guidance to members of the DMC as to the soundness of their position on an application, offering their expert professional opinions as to the success, at appeal, of the grounds on which members may wish to refuse an application. However, it is wrong and a complete failure to understand professional ethics to expect officers to put themselves in a position which it conflicts with their professional judgment or prejudices them in terms of their code of conduct.
Thank you, Councillor Glover-Ward. Councillor Wallace, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
Yes, please. So what assurance can I take back to the residents of Buntingford with regards to the support they can receive from the District Council in supporting its elected members in defending further speculative applications which are far in excess of the prescribed allocation originally set in your district plan?
While the district does not have a 5-year land supply, we are on the tilted balance. While we're on the tilted balance, this makes it more difficult, as you're more than aware, for us to refuse applications. However, all planning applications will be fully considered in line with all the policies and the MPPF, and recommendations will be made by officers. I think you need to trust in the integrity and judgment of the members of DMC, who will then consider officers' reports and do not have to take those reports, but do have to offer valid planning reasons as to why they are taking a certain decision, if that is contrary to officer recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll move on to question 2. Has Councillor Susan Barber arrived? No. Okay, so I will ask Councillor Barber's question. Folly Island is described by the Council's Conservation Area Appraisal as a most delightful area worthy of careful protection. Nevertheless, despite the well-known concerns and objections of the residents, East Herts District Council is ploughing ahead with its plan to introduce wheelie bins throughout Folly Island. Folly Island is not big enough to take multiple bins or the related garbage trucks. Their arrival will destroy the visual charm that makes Folly Island famous. This is not in the best interest of the residents, Hertford or East Hertfordshire. Residents are still awaiting information on the garden waste bin situation, which is due for renewal in March. There is much anxiety felt by many Folly Islanders at what will be coming next. This council claims to be a listening council. Will it, after all, listen to residents and cancel the introduction of further wheelie bins into Folly Island? And that's for Councillor Tim Hoskins.
Well, I think, part of it was to be brief, and I think the brief answer is no. However, the longer answer, I think, is more complicated, and there's an enormous amount of sympathy for Folly Island and other places around the district, both here in East Herts and North Herts, where space is at a premium. So by way of background, the whole of East Herts is undergoing a major transformation in the way that recycling and waste is collected. The first of those changes is that our new contractor, Veolia, takes over duties in May this year. And over recent years, central government has placed a series of legislative changes that demand that local authorities change their approach. I welcome these changes as it gives all residents the opportunity to recycle more and throw away less. And sadly, within East Herts, we still throw away more than we recycle. Folly Island is indeed a fabulous part of Hertford and will be part of 62,000 households undergoing these changes in East Herts and a similar number in North Herts. There's a detailed communication strategy which will be included within every council rate. It'll start by being included within every council rate envelope to be sent out next month. Again, by way of background, a detailed operational assessment has been undertaken on Folly Island and other parts of East Herts. And the way forward has been determined through that detailed operational assessment, that the same approach will be asked of Folly Island residents as it will be of all other East Herts residents. And this is a balanced approach which we believe supports those houses and flats with no off-street storage or houses with specialist waste needs, but yet ensures that residents who are able are encouraged to recycle as much of their waste as possible. And it's a challenging change. It's a change in behaviour for some of us. We do hope the scheme will be welcomed by many and that everyone will quickly use the range of facilities which will be introduced, including flexible plastic and food waste. And we should see, as a result of that participation, we should see our recycling rates take a turn for the better. The team have already been busy on the island working with residents who need assistance when ensuring their bins are out ready for collection and returned again afterwards. And we are of course aware of the issues raised and of the magnitude of the changes for which we are seeking support. And as I said, these changes are not peculiar to Folly Island, but they are being undertaken by all East Herts residents. And the success of the whole scheme will be dependent on how the team do their bit as well as they can, and of course our residents. We'll continue to listen and support residents who need assistance in managing their waste. Big changes coming through, providing the extra recycling capacity and restricting residual waste. We hope is a really powerful solution and a positive way of helping residents to live more sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. So as Councillor Barber's not here, there's no supplementary question, but Councillor Barber will be able to see your response on the website. So thank you. So item 8, members' questions. They're in the supplementary agenda, pages 2 and 3. So 4 questions have been submitted. I need to remind members that both questioner and responding executive member must ensure the question and the reply is succinct, as the time allowed for all the questions shall not exceed 15 minutes. And now that we publish full responses the day after the meeting, short verbal responses are encouraged, so we can keep to the time limit. Any remaining questions not dealt with in this time will be published on the website as soon as possible. So taking the questions in the order submitted, may I invite Councillor Buckmaster to ask his question.
Thank you, Chairman. And in line with your instructions, I'll do a very brief preamble and the question. I'm looking around the chamber, and other than political differences, we're all very similar. We'd all get on in the outside world. We all have the same ambitions, want to serve our communities. And I think we were all elected to be in control of planning and the environment and finances and other
Could we
things.
ask the question, please?
Yeah, I said a short preamble.
Short.
It's coming. I'm going to be 30 seconds. You've wasted more time, Chairman. Sorry about that. I've observed that members don't have any answers to the residents' worries over speculative development. Parts of the district are effectively unprotected, and notwithstanding the response to the public question and tilted balance, I feel members of DMC are losing faith with the planning process. Question, given the recent experience with the Buntingford application that was sent back to committee and eventually approved owing to the lack of 5-year housing supply, has the council undertaken a proper assessment to understand the scale and risks of more speculative applications that are not allocations in the district plan? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There is no doubt that in recent months we have seen an acceleration in speculative applications for permission to build new homes, particularly around Buntingford, because Buntingford is the only town in East Herts that is not in the Greenbelt. You asked the question, has the council undertaken a proper assessment to understand the scale and risks of more speculative applications? I can assure you that officers are doing everything they can within the council's remit, but I'm sure you will appreciate that speculative applications are by their very nature based on conjecture rather than knowledge, which makes undertaking any precise assessment extremely difficult without access to an accurate crystal ball. Unless there is a pre-app consultation, a planning application only becomes an application when it is lodged on the planning portal, and this may be the first time it is reasonable to expect that the planning authority becomes aware of the application. Unfortunately, it is anticipated that the council is likely to continue to receive such applications across the district while the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. As such, officers are focused on updating the council's 5-year housing land supply, and we anticipate that this will be issued in the next month or so. But it should be noted that the approximate 28% increase in the annual housing target that was brought in with the new MPPF in December, on top of the previous Conservative government increases to the housing targets, coupled with a district plan designed to deliver far lower targets, is a major factor impeding the regaining of a 5-year housing land supply. To improve the 5-year housing land supply position, the planning team has been proactively working alongside Hertfordshire County Council and other relevant statutory consultees, stakeholders and the applicants to progress the remaining allocated sites in the district plan towards a position whereby the sites can be considered deliverable within the next 5 years. Alongside work on the 5-year housing land supply, early preparatory work on the district plan update is also being undertaken, with formal work due to commence as soon as the new planning system has been announced later this year. The team are already in discussion with MHCLG about being a front-runner authority, and if chosen, will benefit from expert plan-making support with a view to agreeing a new district plan as soon as possible, which will allow the council to robustly defend its planning decisions. In short, planning officers are doing everything possible to manage the risk of speculative applications at the current time, but until the council can demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, it is likely that the tilted balance will continue to be engaged in the decision-making process. This does not, however, guarantee planning permission is given to every application, nor does the tilted balance replace the legal responsibility of the decision taker to take account of the council's district plan and apply all relevant statutory tests when determining applications for planning permission.
Thank you, Councillor Buckmaster. Would you like to-
Thank you, Chairman. It's good to hear all of those things going on, and I'd expect that. However, it's taken 2 years to get a decision notice on Gilston, and the developer states there'll be no spade in the ground for up to 5 years. Other major allocations, such as Ware North, are progressing very slowly. And as you've said, there's likely to be no possibility of having a 5-year housing supply, probably for the life of this council. And with the call for a sites assessment, that adds more pressure. Now, you said you've been in touch with the ministry. Will you also get in touch with the planning minister and or the planning inspectorate to negotiate terms that enable a review of the district plan that doesn't add to further pressure to an already very serious situation? Thank you, Chairman.
I don't think I quite understand the question, given that planners were talking to MHLGC on Friday about exactly that, updating the district plan. But until the secondary legislation has come through from government, which is a government decision, and we can contact the planning minister to talk about this, but we're amongst a lot of councils that are doing exactly the same thing. We are not alone in the fact that we're on the tilted balance. We are not alone in the fact that we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, and increasing the requirement by nearly 300 houses per annum, as was done last December, does not really help the situation.
Thank you. So may I invite Councillor Aubrey Holt to ask his question?
Thank you, Chairman. This is to Councillor Carl Britton. We know that when formulating the proposed budget for the 2025-26 financial year, that the Green Lib Dem coalition administration considered cutting back on the number of planning enforcement officers. This comes as a big surprise, given the importance of planning enforcement to many of our residents, as I'm sure that many of our email boxes will testify. Can the executive member please give us an assurance that the idea was dropped and that it will not be reviewed in future years? Thank you.
Councillor Britton.
Thank you, Councillor Holt, for the question. With the legacy of the debt we inherited and the continual erosion of funding from central government, budget setting presents us a very difficult challenge, this year being no exception. When significant savings need to be made, it is important at an early stage of the budget setting to consider all the options. When these options were laid out in front of us, it was clear to the executive group that planning enforcement represented one of our red lines, one of the items we were determined not to cut in our quest to reach a balanced budget. Despite being a non-statutory service, we recognise that planning enforcement is there to preserve the integrity of and public confidence in the planning system by ensuring development accords with the rules. I have no doubt that in future years our views on the importance of planning enforcement will not change, and it will remain a service which we try to preserve. When we look at the medium-term financial plan later, we will see that next year is likely to see a new round of required savings. The leadership team are already looking for new transformation projects that will bring savings. But finding savings of this magnitude in the required timescale will be very difficult. And I fully expect that in just over 6 months' time, we will, like last year, be presented with a long list of savings options by the leadership team. As a non-statutory service, I expect planning enforcement will be one of the options presented to us again. And like this year, I expect it will be rejected quickly. But I think it is important it is still included as an option, as it is always helpful when making decisions to see the whole picture, to always understand the full range of choices we are faced with. It also helps to review whether services could be delivered differently, whether there could be other ways to become more efficient. As government continues to reduce our funding, the choices will become ever more difficult, and at some point, possibly even next year, we may be faced with making what now appear to be unpalatable decisions, not out of choice but out of necessity. If we do get to that point, we need to be sure that all the alternatives are considered, because as the decisions we need to take become more difficult, the scrutiny of those decisions is bound to become more intensive. So I cannot realistically give assurance that this idea will not be revived. As an option to save money, it is always present, and rightly so. But I can assure you that this executive fully recognises the value of planning enforcement to the community, and that we will do everything in our gift to preserve its effectiveness in future years.
Thank you, Councillor Britton. Supplementary question.
I do, and thank you for your answer. We also know that the Green Lib Dem coalition considered introducing parking charges for blue badge holders. This has caused real concern, distress, and in many cases outrage from many of our residents who themselves or whose family members are blue badge holders. It's glaringly obvious that parking charges should not be applied.
Holt, this is not related to your initial question.
It is, because it's also referring to regarding the cuts that were considered within the budget.
Ask the question then, please.
That is, it's considering, the initial question was regarding considered cuts for planning officers. This is regarding the considered cuts regarding, well, introducing parking charges for blue badge holders. There are two things that were considered within the budget discussion.
Well, lots of things were discussed in that were considered, so I don't think that's quite the same subject. Do you have something related to your initial question?
I would suggest that was related.
Councillor Britton, what do you? How would you like to respond?
I think I can give you a very simple
Could
answer.
I quickly just, in that case, just finish the final sentence, if
Very
that's
quickly.
okay? Okay, thank you. It's glaringly obvious that parking charges should not be applied to blue badge holders, and I would be grateful if the executive member will confirm that blue badge holders will never be asked to pay parking charges now or any stage in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, as well.
So yes, we have rejected blue badge parking charges, but in the same way as planning enforcement, these things will always come back. But I'll also say I think the blue badge parking charges is considered within the parking strategy, which we'll hear about later, as a potential option for for discussion. So I think we can leave that for that discussion rather than here. But we have rejected it in the past.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So may I ask Councillor David Jacobs for his question?
Thank you. My question is for Councillor Crystal, the leader of the council. Has the administration considered the possibility of holding council meetings, either full council or subcommittee meetings, in venues outside of Hertford? In doing so, it would enhance the council's visibility in the community, improve accessibility to members of the public wishing to attend meetings in person, and address the widespread perceptions that the council is overly Hertford-centric. In doing so, what considerations would need to be taken into account to identify suitable venues, and what investigations have been done to date?
Councillor Crystal.
Thanks for the question, David. David, like you, and I'm sure many other councillors here, I'd welcome the opportunity for some meetings to be held beyond this council chamber. But there are, as you suggested in your question, some obvious challenges. Firstly, capacity and accessibility. So we'd need somewhere accessible with space for at least 60 seats plus space for the public if it was going to be if we were going to consider moving full council out to a different location. The second challenge is technology. As always, we do webcast our meetings here, and not to do so in another location would be a step backwards in my view. The system in here is not portable, as I'm sure you can see, but we do have more portable OWL webcasting systems which could potentially be used, but the system is really only suitable for quite small meetings. And as many of us know from bitter experience, webcasting systems can be extremely temperamental, especially if moved to new locations. Thirdly, there is also an issue of cost, which we must face. Using this chamber comes at a minimal cost, so pricing would also need to be a consideration, and rightly so. All that said, we'd be very happy to consider proposals from yourself or other councillors. You know what locations are available to you locally, their cost of hire, and perhaps you can negotiate a significant discount on any cost. And whether they can offer webcasting or have suitable Wi-Fi technology. And are accessible as well, of course. So if we think about holding a committee meeting elsewhere, then perhaps we would be looking at an accessible space for 10 or 15 people, plus space for the public, which shouldn't be too impossible to find. So over to you, councillors. But David, do please suggest some.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
I didn't quite get an answer to the final part of the question, which is what investigations have been done to date. Is the answer none?
It's no investigations on any specific locations. No, I think the investigations that have been done to date have really been around thinking about the challenges, and we know, I think officers have suggested where we could potentially have meetings, but we haven't gone beyond that. So I think if there are some suggestions for overview and scrutiny, for example, to be taken around to Bishop Stortford or somewhere else, I think that will be a great thing to consider. So we'd be very happy to discuss it.
Thank you. Councillor McAndrew, welcome. I'm afraid you've just arrived as the 15 minutes is up in our question time, so you're not able to ask the question, and Councillor Britton's response will be on the website tomorrow. Thank you. Okay, item 9, executive report. This report relates to the meeting of the executive on the 11th of February 2025. So I'd like to invite Councillor Crystal to present his report.
Thank you, Chair. So since our last council meeting in December, the executive has met as a committee twice and considered and supported a number of papers, including 2 at the meeting on the 11th of February, which have come to tonight's full council for consideration. The first is the Parking Strategy 2025, and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Tim Hoskin to present it.
Well, that was shorter than I was expecting. So thank you. Good evening. This report, which you have in front of you, is presented to members, is a proposed parking strategy for East Hertfordshire following public consultation and engagement. And it's worth just reminding ourselves that consultation ran over a 5-week period last autumn, and it was open to all members of the public, and all councillors within this room and all town and parish councillors were free to attend either in person or using the online survey. And we had something like 1,700 responses. So just for clarity, I think it's worth just a little bit of explanation. The only matter before council this evening is the parking strategy. The parking tariff increases, which also went to the executive on the 11th of February, was an executive decision, not a council decision. And the inclusion of the parking charges at Appendix D, which went before the executive, are in this paper purely for information purposes only. They are not capable of being amended, as a decision on these has already been taken. Support for the strategy is therefore independent of the comments made either in support or of or against the charges. So back in February 2024, the council approved a £1.75 million income target for parking for the financial years 25-26 through to 27-28. And it's this strategy that sets the context, the strategic context and principles by which changes may be approved and to support the achievement of the income and wider ambitions of this council. Background in response to the climate emergency and in alignment with the East Herts' new corporate plan, this parking strategy has been designed to ensure that the council effectively manages parking demand while addressing the challenges of population growth, as we've just heard in other items, and above national average high rates of car ownership. The council aims to discourage inessential car journeys and promote more sustainable alternatives, and particularly for short trips. And this will be critical in reducing congestion, optimising parking space usage, and tackling issues related to air pollution, climate change, and road safety. So in August, we commissioned CitySense to support the development of this strategy. And following the adoption of the Listening Council principles, there was a strong focus, as I said, on resident and business engagement early on in the process. And looking around the room, there are a number of people who attended those sessions. You can see the responses there in Appendix A. There are three strategic aims in the parking strategy, and they're all centred around sustainability, community well-being, and economic prosperity, which link back to the corporate plan and other associated strategies as listed within the strategy at page 6. In a number of areas, pricing is clearly used as a tool to motivate behavioural change. Strategic aims have been guided by three key objectives which determine the actions for delivery: alternative, balanced and considerate. Alternative, we wish to support motorists to consider alternatives, whether that be the take-up of more environmentally friendly vehicles and sustainable alternatives to driving. Balanced, to take a more balanced approach to parking by making change to make it fairer, easier and more consistent across East Herts. Considerate, adopting a more environmentally considerate approach to managing parking services throughout East Herts. To achieve these objectives, a set of 22 actions have been developed, and you'll see that they're laid out in terms of short, medium and long term. And these actions range from altering the pricing structures, which we've been through to encourage behavioural change, to abolishing the use of paper-based permits and procedures, and lots more in between that you'll have read through. This strategy will function as an evolving framework, allowing the council to review and refine actions as needed and in response to ongoing monitoring. To be successful in delivering these actions for council, it recognises that it cannot be the direct delivery of change alone, and we must work with partners to maximise our impact. And to this end, we will adopt a number of roles. We will be a direct deliverer of change in some instances. We will act as a facilitator for change in others, and we'll be lobbying for change in other areas. The strategy was presented at the overview and scrutiny on the 14th of January, and the strategy was taken to the exec on the 11th of February and unanimously recommended to council for adoption. I propose this paper and its recommendation for discussion and approval at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. And our seconder is Councillor Wilson.
One short. Yes, I'm happy to second this proposal and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. So does any member have any comments or would like to ask questions? Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm going to have to be opposed to this strategy. And the reason for that is because there's a very strong move within it to get rid of free parking periods. And at overview and scrutiny and other meetings, some of us have said previously, you ought to treat the smaller towns and villages differently to the larger ones. And I know you've gone through a public consultation. And I feel, having listened to the discussion at the executive, Sawbridgeworth has kept its free periods just because of a technicality. And you won't change my mind over that. That's the impression I've had. And we've got vast numbers of people in Sawbridgeworth who are really concerned. You know, as a county councillor, I spend a huge amount of my time. The leader would be able to verify this. As county councillors, we spend a lot of time on on-street parking issues. But the town is full of cars. We're not going to change that. And if you take away weekend free parking, then when all of the clubs and associations have their visitors, all of those are going to go on the streets, and it's going to cause a problem. And of course, all of the businesses are concerned. We'll talk about the hike in charges later in the budget discussion, even though you've confirmed it's already done. But I think these things will cause a huge problem. I have to listen to my residents, so I can't agree with the way this is formatted. And I know you might be saying we're preempting it because it's going to be a consultation, but we know the direction of travel. So that's the reason that I can't support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Passad-Wyatt.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's some really important actions in here, which I would love to be able to support. I think certainly the plan to put in some more EV chargers across the district is essential. Certainly looking at the numbers in there, we are well behind where we need to get to. And I speak as a representative of Sawbridgeworth, which is a town which has 0 EV chargers, despite repeated asks to this council over the last 5 years. So I think great to see that in the strategy. I just ask that we get on with it. Likewise, the move to paperless for ticketing. I think we already have paperless options available through the pay by parking or pay by phone app. I do know that app actually has a fee for using the app, which is sort of a disincentive to use it. Whether we can build that fee into our parking rates or look at whether that fee can be eradicated altogether to incentivize people to use the app rather than paper would be good to look at as part of the consultation. But for all the same reasons that Councillor Buckmaster has outlined, I'll have to vote against the strategy as a whole, because I think there are some directions or some suggestions in this document which don't sit comfortably with me in terms of how Sawbridgeworth as a town operates. Particularly on the 30-minute free parking. I think particularly on the language around standardising this strategy across towns. I think there is a real feeling from our residents in Sawbridgeworth that the consultation is a consultation for the sake of it, rather than one which actually seeks to listen to what people in Sawbridgeworth are saying, because I think it feels like things are being predetermined. And I think there's a couple of other points around emissions-based pricing, which we know from ULEZ in London tends to hit the poorest residents hardest, those who can't change their cars, those who don't have electric vehicles. I'm concerned about that. And despite the answer to Councillor Holt's question earlier, this document does still have that line about reviewing the concessions for blue badge parking. And again, I feel uncomfortable with that. So as I said, there are things in here that I'd love to support, but as a whole, as a document, I will have to vote against it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deering.
No, thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I broadly would echo what Angus has just said and Eric before him. There's obviously some stuff in here that everybody would be supportive of. You know, we're all supportive of trying to reduce emissions as much as we can. But at the same time, there are elements of the strategy that, just as is the case with Angus and Eric, I personally am uncomfortable with. If we might call it the ULEZ point, you know what we mean by that. I'm very uncomfortable about that. I think the last thing we should be doing is discriminating against people who, to be blunt, can't afford swanky new cars with very clean engines or indeed electric cars. These are people that need our support. So I'm very, very uncomfortable about that. I'm also very, very uncomfortable about any strategy that would discourage people from coming into our high streets. Um, to some degree, I echo Angus's comments. A lot of comments have come through to me from residents to the effect that they don't quite feel that their views have been listened to here. I think shopkeepers in our towns are quite concerned about these proposals. And there are also aspects of the tariff aspects to this, which I'm concerned about, and we'll come back to those later this evening, I think. So the position that the Conservative group will take on this is that we will either, depending on individual attitudes, we will either vote against or we will abstain. Thank you very much, Tim.
Any more? Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just building on what Councillor Pussard-Wyatt said, I completely agree regarding the potential move to paperless and just keeping review on that. I mean, if you go to an East Herts managed car park and look at the signs, there are about 3 or 4 different ways of paying for a car park, and it's all generally quite cluttered on that sign. You know, if you're a visitor to East Herts, or English might not necessarily be your first language, that sort of language, we need a bit more plainer English when it comes to explaining to residents and visitors alike on how to pay for car parking. So completely agree with you on that point. On the ULEZ point, though, I do have to push back on that. Firstly, we're a sort of mixture of urban and rural as a council, not some sort of metropolitan borough. So I don't think the comparisons to ULEZ are very useful. Also, it's worth noting the poorest people in our communities don't own cars at all. They rely on public transport. I'm 22. If you speak to many 22-year-olds in East Herts, a lot of them are going without a car for exactly the same reason.
So, Councillor Wilson? Oh, sorry, Councillor Watson, do you want to speak?
I'm just, I've been speaking to a lot of residents in Ware who are crying out for us to improve our rules on RPZs, and in Hertford too. I think the direction of travel on this is hugely encouraging, and I support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Councillor Copley.
I was just going to say, I listened with interest to the point that Councillor Deering said about the impact it might have on businesses. I personally think it's very naive to think that if you keep the parking charges down, that will be what will save the businesses. Actually, I think we should be encouraging all our residents and ourselves to actually not buy things on Amazon and go and support our local shops. And in my experience, it isn't the parking charges that are making any difference at all. It's the fact that people want to go out and save their high street and do things. And I know, obviously, in Bishop Stortford, the bid worked very hard for that kind of thing. So actually, I think there needs to really be actually a change in mindset about that, and actually, encouraging people to go in and actually use the great businesses that we do have in our towns. Thanks.
Councillor Hopewell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just wanted to echo Councillor Copley's point. I was reading some interesting research earlier that shows that often businesses may overestimate how many people do actually travel by car and kind of park directly outside. And actually visitors that do come by foot or by bicycle or what have you, or who drive but stay for a longer period of time, who aren't just turning up, rushing to one shop with only 20 minutes and then like not exploring the rest of the town because they want to have their free parking, is the people that have dwelled in the town for longer are the ones that are actually using the shops more. And a great way of increasing dwell time is to free up some of that space, or to kind of not focus on free parking that kind of encourages people to drive, park for a really short time and then go again. We want to encourage people to stay in the town centres for much longer, really, so they use more of the shops that are there. Thank you.
Councillor Bristol.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Hopewell and Councillor Copley, and I think one of the things that I know we've tried to do, and Councillor Vicky Glover Ward has been, I think, very successful in starting to do this, is encourage our markets to be much stronger in our towns, because that's one of those things that will pull people in, get the footfall in on days when perhaps towns' high streets will be quieter. So I think there are measures that we're already trying to do to support businesses in high streets, and I think that's a really important act. So yeah, we should support that change.
Councillor Horner.
Thank you, Chair. A very short point. I'd like to echo the comments of Councillor Watson. I think it's very important that we do look at the rules around residence parking zones, talking to people within my ward, and it's salutary that there haven't been any new RPZs since the last time the rules were changed. I think that was five or 6 years ago. So I do think that and I do welcome that change. And want to echo the comments that have been made on behalf of my residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support what Councillor Thomas said. I've got young people in my family. I've got 3 and only 2, and 2 of them don't drive, and therefore they use public transport, and buses are really expensive. And I think we have to set alongside what young people are having to pay on buses, well, people of all ages are having to pay on buses alongside these charges for car parks. And I hope that as part of the lobbying, we will be lobbying the County Council for better bus prices. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor
I commend this simply because it's a strategy and that it has strategic aims, and it's been prepared in a careful and wide-ranging way, and that within this strategy there is this sense of fairness and balance, demand management, realism for a complex matter. But I think the approach has been correct, and it's good to have a strategy rather than no strategy.
Okay, Councillor McAndrews.
Thank you. I think we've got to bear in mind that East Herts is a rural community rather than just urban, and with fuel poverty, our residents in the rural areas find it very difficult to get into the town centres and dwell, and they need every help they can actually get.
Okay, we go back to you, Councillor Wilson. Oh, sorry. You've already spoken. Oh no, you haven't. Sorry, Councillor Holt.
Sorry, that was my question earlier. Thank you, Chairman. Just coming back to a couple of points that were made. Saying that someone who represents a very rural ward in the district, is that a lot of the people who I find visiting the town for short periods, maybe visiting shops such as butchers and other shops on the high street, choose to do so in that short period because it's achievable, and as a result of the free parking, it's something that's affordable. And often isn't a case that when a charge would be increased, instead that they would frequent or visit large supermarkets on the edge of towns where there is that free parking available for them to go in and instead at a cheaper and in that case what would be easier for them to pick up their groceries rather than relying on those sole traders within the town, because there would be that added cost. And that was one point. Another point regarding also, as Councillor McAndrew suggested, being a rural district, and once again representing a rural ward, is that a lot of young people, but also those who are perhaps financially challenged, can't always rely on public transport, and that they do often have to use vehicles, and as a result that this and the policy that was suggested, the ULEZ policy, would definitely and certainly hinder them, and they can't actually turn to, as was previously suggested, public transport in all cases. So I just wanted to highlight that, you know, as you said, that people who are less financially able or younger people very heavily rely on public transport. That isn't always the case, especially in the rural parts of our district. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Just obviously, I get that concern, you know, about visiting the butchers and the bakers and whatever. If you were, however, heading to a butcher's or bakers and where you could park at Tesco, which is free for 2 hours. You can go through, visit our amazing bookshop, stop at the butcher's, head to the bakery, get in your car, and go home all within an hour. It's great.
Councillor Hart.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on the thing about exploring the incentives for car sharing, carpooling, which is a very positive initiative. And but I see that you have made a reference to the lift share in Surrey, which is one of the schemes you'd looked at, and I wondered what has actually been done to put that into practice. I know it is a long-term aim, but do we have any concrete plans to realise it in any meaningful way?
I reserve my right to respond at the end if I answer this specific question.
Yes.
Yes, there you go. It's a very short answer. We've done nothing specific in that space other than the obligatory email internet search. There are some active schemes going on in Calderdale which sound very positive on a car sharing basis. The backdrop to car sharing is being further complicated more recently with insurance complications and trying to get insurance for those sorts of schemes. So it is a complex area, but I agree with you. It's a very well worthwhile area to start lifting the lid on. I live on a close with 12 houses and there are more than 25 cars in that space. And often we follow each other down into town.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, try again.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think we have really attempted to be fair. It's never easy in a council where you have people representing different areas, and all of us, not just Councillor Buckmaster and others, have had posts about wanting car parking charges to be less. So if we said yes to everybody, then we would have a lot less money than we could possibly deal with. And that's the question, really. Where else will the money come from? Well, I look forward. I don't see an alternative budget, so I look forward to that. I mean, genuinely, we would be happy to see any other suggestions. There have not been any so far. It's been a long process, so even last minute, would be welcome. So that's of course Buntingford, Silverbridge, and Stansted Abbots all do have lesser charges overall than the towns in this strategy. So there is an element of fairness. I'll echo what was said previously by Councillor Copley and others, that if you look at studies, you'll find there is an almost universally identical decline in footfall along in high streets across the country, which makes it rather unlikely that it's anything to do with parking charges that there's a decline in footfall. We have to be realistic. It may well be that people are seeing their businesses having less footfall and seeing parking going up, but that's a correlation, not a causation. And it seems, as it's universal, that across the whole country we have declining footfall, and across the whole country we have rising online shopping, but it's actually online shopping that's causing this. So we have to address that, and as someone else has said previously, look at ways to make the town centres more attractive in different ways. The other thing I would finally say is that without wishing to encourage our demise, it would be very helpful to this strategy if we were unitary in this case, because the balance we've had to strike, and I hope we have struck, is that people have to be reliant on their cars in certain circumstances because of the nature of this district, but also because of the appalling lack actually of sustainable transport alternatives in East Hertfordshire and generally Hertfordshire, but particularly East Hertfordshire, poor cycle lanes, poor pedestrian routes. And if we were all one council, perhaps we could coordinate the two things. At the moment, we can't decide on those things, so we have to be careful not to make the parking too expensive for people who have no choice but to use it.
Councillor Hoskins, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of points. I think layered within this strategy is an ambition to try and get rid of the inessential journeys. These aren't the essential journeys by definition. Something above 70% of people who live in our towns live within 1 or 2 miles of the town centre. And those are the specific areas we're trying to target with a parking strategy, which gives a second thought to, should I drive in? Should I walk in? We've got an LC whip, which is on the go at the moment, looking at infrastructure, as Chris said, infrastructure which is sadly lacking, and trying to join some of those dots up. This parking strategy is an attempt to walk alongside that, walk alongside that, cycle alongside it, to be part of a sustainable move so that we can try and get some, as Councillor Estott said, a strategic approach to this, so that instead of playing whack-a-mole, we actually try and move this thing forward in a logical order, and I'd commend it to the members.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. This is the first item in the executive report on which there is a recommendation, and recommendation A is detailed on page 18. And that recommendation is that the parking strategy 2025 be approved. So if you'd like to raise your hands, all those in favour? All those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you. So item 9B, call for sites update. Could I hand over to, oh, sorry, Ben, you should be doing that.
Thank you, Chair. It's my job to hand over. The second paper in the executive report is on the East Herts Council call for sites, and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Vicky Glover-Ward to present it.
Thank you, Leader. Contrary to some allegations on social media about dodgy dealings behind closed doors over the last weekend, this council agreed in public and available on video at the full council meeting in October 2023 that following the review of the district plan, there should be an update of the adopted district plan. Last October, this council agreed the local development scheme, which revised the timetable for the production of an updated district plan commencing in autumn this year. When updating the district plan, the planning team need to assemble a huge amount of evidence to support any strategy or policy in the plan that the council wants to include. The government requires that up-to-date plans should provide a framework for addressing housing needs along with other economic, social and environmental priorities. As the local planning authority, it is the responsibility of the council to ensure that sufficient homes are built every year to meet our housing requirement. As part of the preparation before we officially start the update of the district plan, the planning department has undertaken a call for sites. This call for sites took place between July and September 2024 and invited landowners, developers, agents and site promoters to submit areas of land for the council to consider whether these would be suitable to help meet the need for housing and other uses across a new plan period. The call for sites is necessary because once a new district plan has been made, it will run for 15 years from that date when it has been made. So we anticipate that the updated plan will have a term to the early 2040s rather than only 2033 as is the limit of the current plan. Just submitting a site through the call for sites does not in any way confirm that it will be selected for allocation in the district plan, and there will be a few stages before decisions can be made about which sites should be developed. This report only details the outcome of the call for sites and just includes a presentation of the sites that have been submitted and the information that has been submitted with them, which is why there may be the odd mistake in the address or allocation of same, because it's done on GIS referencing as well as on addresses. And we're now outlining the process that will be followed. The call for sites initially yielded a total of 282 site submissions for consideration. The attached appendices give both an overview of the sites as they're distributed across the district and provide a location map and site area outline for every specific entry, alongside the key details of that submission. Since the call for sites report was made public, 2 further sites have been submitted, County Horn in Hertford and 1 at Buntingford, in an addendum, and 1 site has been withdrawn. Now that the call for sites has been completed, and the information for each submission has been collated and summarised, the Council will use the data to move to the next stage in the plan making process, which is a strategic land availability assessment for the district. The report details the exact process of preparing the strategic land availability assessment, but it will assess the suitability of the sites against planning criteria such as flood risk, heritage setting, access and the like. The planning policy team will begin the process of an overview evaluation of each of the 283 sites, ratifying inconsistent information and getting an up-to-date view on development progress to obtain a better understanding of the deliverability, viability and availability of each site. It will become clear that some submitted sites will not be suitable when national policy and designations are applied and constraints are taken into account. I will bring a report back to members following the completion of this initial high-level assessment. From my email inbox, which has continued to receive a number of representations on various sites, I know that the call for site has been used to cause consternation for residents who are for or against a particular site. At this stage of the process, there is a purely mechanical assessment to be undertaken, and as such, any petitions, emails or other correspondence is completely premature. The Council will be undertaking consultation on the district plan as part of the update process, which starts properly this autumn, and the outline for this is contained within the Local Development Scheme paper from October 2024.
You're proposing.
And I'm proposing, yes.
Thank you. And I'll second that. Councillor Swainston. Thank you.
I reserve my right to speak later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Does any member wish to comment or ask questions? Councillor Hart.
Sorry, I just have one actually, because the time frame for this is so long, because you're talking about, you know, identifying sites that kind of go in well in advance to 2040 even, which is a very long time frame, isn't it? And I just wondered when you're doing these assessments, how much does something like the UK CP considerations that have been done, how much weight is given to those in making determinations?
Are you happy to wait to the end and collect all the questions? Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Restop.
Chair, we have a very sound, we're lucky to have a sound district plan, which has served us well, and we're lucky to have this process that has started and is in progress towards a review of the district plan. I see this as a bit of a look under the bonnet at a process in the middle, which we're in the middle of. I think the significance about this is not the sites that have been proposed by the landowners and so on. It is the fact that the Planning Service now starts its strategic land availability study. That's the main operation. That's where officers and consultants will look at actually what is the best spatial strategy, where are the sites best allocated. So I welcome that. This is the correct process for a spatial strategy, not the speculative submission of planning applications for very large sites. I regret that the council is obliged to consider applications, and we've heard from the executive member about the council's obligations, but that obligation to deal with applications that are submitted contradicts the plan-led system, actually. I wonder whether really the full council is the right place for oversight of this process. It does seem to me that there needs to be a member body or a committee that looks at strategic policy, and I wonder whether that's something that the executive member could have a think about.
Thank you. Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say I have faith in our planning policy team. I was on the executive panel that reviewed the last process, and so just in response to that, that's really the body that does it. I'm sure Councillor Glover Ward would have said that. It's just the way of the process, unfortunately. We have to have a call for sites, and we don't know what's going to come in. And of course, everybody thinks that they can put their prospective sites in. A vast number of them will be filtered out, I'm sure. We have to have engagement with other bodies, including the County Council and Highways. There's a lot of pressure on the area already. So all of those things will be taken into account. Just going back to my earlier question, which I can probably discuss more freely now, part of the reason for asking it was in view of the changes and the capacity that's going to go into local government reorganisation. It's going to put such a pressure on this and other councils. And that's why I was really saying, can we talk to the ministry about what we can really achieve over the next couple of years and actually have a proper look at what can be achieved with the call for sites? Because if we just follow the process as we've always done it, we could end up actually even beyond the life of this council, still not having a 5-year housing supply, whichever body picks that up. So it was just around that. We've got a lot to do over the next couple of years, all of us. Just need to be mindful of that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Deering.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just starting with most recent comments and working backwards. If I might say, I think the points you just made, Eric, are really, really serious points. Thoroughly support what you just said there, and I'm sure you will absolutely take these points on board. It's clear that there's a major reorganisation coming, and resources are going to be very stretched. So I hope you will very much take on board what Councillor Buckmaster has said. I'm sure you will, but I just want to add my voice to that. Otherwise, certainly on this side of the chamber, we do understand the process. We understand it's a call for sites. Sites put forward will not necessarily eventually be picked up or developed. We do understand that. Again, as I think everybody in the room is probably aware, communications with the public is quite important in this area, isn't it? So I think we would clearly call upon you as the administration to communicate with the public as well and as informatively as you can. And then I think the only other thing I would say, just for the avoidance of doubt, and I'm sure this applies to every member in the room, that in supporting this recommendation, which I think clearly must be supported, I'm sure we'll all be very anxious just to make it clear to all our residents that by supporting this recommendation, we are not necessarily taking any view on any particular site that's being put forward. So it's, in that sense, the support of this recommendation is completely neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McAndrew.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Councillor Buckmaster and Councillor Deering, and the local plan, having been part of it previously, it's not a journey for the faint-hearted. It's quite a traumatic experience going through this. And I know Highways will rule out a number of sites and various other, the Environment Agency, etc., etc. But I was just wondering that with the housing supply, it's very difficult for us to achieve the targets that we've given by the government. Is there a danger that some of the sites could come forward through the planning process to be developed, or are we safe to say that these sites won't come forward and not be developed prior to going through the rigorous process? Thank you.
Councillor Walcombe.
Thank you, Chairman. I too welcome this call for sites, but I would like to question the executive as to whether or not there's been a similar call for infrastructure, because all of us know within East Herts we're short on sewage treatment infrastructure and water supply infrastructure. And without that infrastructure being available and paid for, and the companies ready to provide it, I think the district plan is going to be seriously compromised. And although it's wonderful to look at 282 sites in this call for sites without the corresponding infrastructure to support those sites, I feel it's a difficult site to motion to agree upon tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Swainston, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I very much welcome the members who spoke in recognition that this is an essential process that we have to go through, and that it is at the planning stage. If they get accepted for planning, then it will be at the planning application stage that things that will be thoroughly looked at then, and that's the time for the public to comment on a planning application that has reached that stage. So I'm glad that everyone, or nearly everyone, is on board and thinks that recognises that it's an essential process, and it will give us the best opportunity to protect the areas that we wish to protect, and to get the housing that we need and the sites that we need to meet our 5-year land supply. Sorry, a bit croaky.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, echo Councillor Swainston's comments. I welcome the very responsible and correct comments of Councillor Buckmaster and Councillor Deering. However, just to pick up on one point from Councillor Deering, in that he said that he'd like us to communicate this, which absolutely we want to do that, and we'll try our best to do that as well as we can. But I'd say that all councillors should be responsible for communicating responsibly to their residents and continue this message. I'm sure that you will do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I just wanted to take an unpleasant job away from Councillor Glover Ward in regard to the call for infrastructure. It doesn't exist. I don't think there's any mechanism to do it, and the closest thing is Section 106. And I also just wanted to comment on what Councillor Buckmaster said about putting our planning staff through talking to the government about this. I think with what they've unfurled, it would be like trying to sort of reason with a gorilla as it beats you with your own arm. It's not. It's ridiculous. But yeah, very pleasant. But I just wanted to defend. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Glover Ward.
Yeah, thank you, George. Right. Okay. So the first question I've got written down, these aren't necessarily in order, was from Councillor McAndrews, who said, "Can I guarantee that sites that have come through for the call for sites won't have speculative planning applications for them?" No, I can't. And I think I covered that in my answer to Councillor Buckmaster earlier. On the infrastructure, specifically on sewage treatment and water, those basically Thames Water and Affinity both put in 5-year programs of the infrastructure that they're going to build. The infrastructure is based on the likely sites that are going to come forward under the district plan, not the other way round. In terms of the long time frames, the initial assessment will look at things like flood risk, contamination, access, also things like biodiversity implications and environmental constraints, heritage setting, any adjacent previous or current land use, the location within the district, and the sustainability, which relates to things like proximity to education, employment services and infrastructure, e.g. public transport. But the assumption will be is that if the sites are currently suitable for development, they will remain suitable for development. And unless there is a change to planning law that then renders them not suitable, they will be retained as such. I agree that we want a plan-led system. And I appreciate Councillor Buckmaster confirming that there is the District Plan Executive Committee, which will be dealing with most of the strategic decisions. I know that I don't think Councillor Estock was here for the previous district plan, but those are meetings that other councillors can attend. It works like exec, so you can ask questions and throw your opinions in at the same time. Councillor Buckmaster asked about changes to local government and the reorganisation. I think the answer to that is the journey is as short as a journey that you start on, and we either wait for devolution, and I don't like the terminology devolution because I think it's concentration of power. However, we can either wait for that and then start the district plan as a unitary, or we can start the district plan now, and it will not be finished within the life of this council, but we will be handing something to our replacement authority that is mostly there, because the plan making process is expected to be 30 months. This is a somewhat ambitious timetable, considering that the average time for district plans being made previously to this government's ambitions was 7 years. So doing it in 30 months is a challenge, and that is why the planners are trying to get a head start on doing various things like the visioning and the call for sites and the evidence bases now. And I think that was everything I covered.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the second item in the executive report on which there are two recommendations, A and B, and they're detailed on page 18. So the recommendation to council that the call for site submissions be noted and agreed for evaluation through the strategic land availability assessment, and B, that the results of the strategic land availability assessment be reported in due course. So can we have a show of hands? All those in favour? Okay, and anybody against, and any abstentions? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 10. This is the budget 2025-26 and medium-term financial plan on pages 517 to 554. And I invite Executive Member Councillor Carl Britton.
Thank you, Chair. The report presents the final budget for 2025-26, along with the medium-term financial plan 2025 to 2035 in the Appendix A. Despite the uncertainty around the future of East Darts District Council following the English Devolution White Paper, it is still a requirement for this council to assess a balanced budget and produce a medium-term financial plan. The medium-term financial plan presents a balanced budget for 2025-26 with a small £6,000 surplus. The base case medium-term financial plan was shared with the Executive in October 2024, and at the time this showed a budget gap of approximately £2 million. Base budgets, statutory and non-statutory services have been reviewed in detail, and savings options considered and discussed at both leadership team meetings and joint meetings with Executive. These meetings resulted in the identification of a further £1.46 million of officer delegated savings and £492,000 of member recommended savings. And these are detailed in Appendices B and C. These savings proposals were presented to the Joint Audit and Governance and Overview and Scrutiny meeting on January the 29th, and the comments made are listed in Appendix F. Most of the officer delegated savings will come from savings on contracts and holding vacancies open. Member recommended savings include a reduction in the contributions to the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town, a reduction in the member training budget, a reduction to community grants, the disposal of Millstream properties, efficiencies in our approach to partnerships, and also an increase to the charges for garden waste. The Appendices B and C also show the savings proposals agreed in the 2024-25 budget that are still to be implemented in 2025-26. These are shown in the top half of these papers. Some of these have by necessity been adjusted, where the planned savings could not be achieved within the timescale. Also detailed in Appendix C are the suggestions that were rejected by the Executive. These include reduction or cessation of planning enforcement, cessation of licensing enforcement, the reduction in the amount spent on council communications, and the reduction or cessation of the grant to the Citizens Advice Bureau. We believe all these services are extremely important for the community, and whilst all are non-statutory, they are essential services which provide excellent value for money to residents. The The major changes to the cost of services are shown in sections 1.6 to 1.66 of the report. Of note here include gains from the extended producer responsibility payment, the lower than expected pay award, and the reduction in capital expenditure charged to revenue accounts. However, these are offset by a reduction in the income forecast for BEAM, the rise in employers' national insurance, and the ongoing rates liability for Charrington's House. On council tax, the medium-term financial plan is based on a 2.98% increase, which is the maximum allowed without a referendum. The ongoing pressures of high interest rates and the continuing lack of adequate funding from the government leave the council with little choice. The new level of council tax for this council will be £201.04 for a Band D property, or just £3.86 per week. It should be emphasised at this stage that this budget requires all the planned savings to be realised. In order to achieve this balanced budget, we have had to draw £164,000 from earmarked reserves, with no plan to add to our reserves. Compared with other local district councils, our reserves are already low. The leadership team will meet fortnightly to review the savings plans and identify issues as they arise, as it is recognised that delivery of these savings plans is absolutely vital. Despite this, there are still risks ahead. External factors such as the cost of finance or changes to the business rates we pay are all outside our direct control, but can have a significant impact on our ability to meet our budget. The other major risk lies with the performance of BEAM and whether it can generate the forecast surplus. It took a tremendous effort last year to get BEAM opened on time, but even now it is not yet fully functional, and this has had an impact on the finances this year. The business plan for BEAM is being reviewed, but the recently appointed Commercial and Cultural Development Manager believes the new proposed income target in the medium-term financial plan is very realistic and is fully committed to achieving it. There is clearly still a lot of work to be done to get BEAM operating effectively, but officers are aware of the issues and are working through a long list of tasks which will improve the financial performance of BEAM. A full member briefing on the BEAM business plan is scheduled for Thursday, March the 20th, where members will be able to review the plan with officers in more detail. Looking beyond 2025-26 in the medium-term financial plan, there is a £1.7 million shortfall in the budget for 26-27, and new options to bridge this gap will need to be identified. While this appears to be a large deficit, I should remind members that in 24-25 that we were in a very similar position with large savings needed for 25-26. Work will continue to find ways to make these savings. New transformation options to drive further efficiency savings are to be considered by the leadership team. Work is already in progress on reviewing the Council's application of its minimum revenue policy, which may lead to budget savings by spreading the minimum revenue policy over longer time periods for certain capital projects. I do, however, wonder when or if we will ever reach the point when new cuts are not going to be required. One problem is that so much of our financial situation is outside our direct control. If you take business rates, for example, in our budget for 25-26, we get to retain just over £5 million. Due to a planned government review, the anticipated changes in the formula mean we expect this to fall to just over £3 million in 26-27 and beyond. I understand this council is one of those that have been hit the hardest by this change. If we can just for a moment imagine that this change was not going to happen, we would now be looking at a medium-term financial plan that showed a forecast surplus every year until 2032. We should perhaps celebrate this as a huge success for this council and thank our officers for all their hard work in helping to get to the point of being financially sustainable for the long term. Unfortunately, the reality is the new government have moved the goalposts yet again, and over the next 12 months much more work is needed to bring our income and expenditure back into balance again. As a result of this, there is currently no room for any significant additional expenditure from either the revenue or capital budgets. The capital programme is detailed in section 1.9 of the report and Appendix D. The programme proposed is the maximum affordable. There is currently no scope for any additional unfunded schemes. The major expenditure in 25-26 will be on vehicles and containers for the new waste contract. From 27-28 onwards, the only schemes proposed are investments in operational assets and the ICT rolling programme. New capital schemes will only become affordable when there is headroom within the revenue account to cover the interest and the minimum revenue provision costs. The existing programme will be funded by a mixture of external grants, capital receipts and new loans. In summary, the financial situation remains very challenging, but we have again been able to produce a balanced budget for the year ahead. Work continues apace to try to close the gap between income and expenditure for future years and to ensure that budget targets are met in 25-26. The recommendations are shown at the top of page 2 of the report, and I propose this report.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Swainston going to second it. Thank you. So does any member wish to comment or ask a question? Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you. I'll get in early. I'm sure others will have additional things. Yeah, it's good to hear that Beam will get there eventually and the leisure service is making money. And I know that there was significant extended producer responsibility funding, which, just as with the county council, that supports the budgets this year. And I don't know whether it was this year or not, but extra burdens funding as well for the food waste. So that all helps. I just wanted to say a couple of things. This administration declared very early on that it intended eventually to replace the executive system with the alternative, although it seems that you don't mind using executive powers. And the reason I mention that, and I'm going to refer back to 2 key revenue generators, which are in the budget figures, which are green waste and organic waste, and the parking charges, which have already been decided. Now, I'm not saying at all that you haven't followed due process. I'm not saying you didn't have the right to do that. Those are your powers. But the fact that it was done just before the budget, and it's part of the budget, and full council is the time to talk about the budget, it just seems like bad form to do that, and residents could perceive that as not being democratic. So I'm really not saying you've done anything wrong, but it just doesn't look good. My real bone of contention is around the percentage increases in the parking, and I'm referring to my own ward again now. You know, the projected revenue increase for certain parking periods is 70%. You know, I've had that confirmed by officers, and the increase in the green waste is around 20%. Now, again, I can't support a budget like this that my own residents would rail against. So that's really the issue for me, the really big issue. Other members have other things they want to say. Now, in terms of alternative budget, I know from previous experience, it's very difficult for an opposition to come up with an alternative budget for a small council because, and I know Joe's tried, you know, it doesn't really make much difference. So all you can do is argue a few points, which is what I'm doing now. I will leave you with one thought, though. I have often wondered why you have 8 executive members, same as the county council, which has a budget of 1.2 billion. Just leaving you with that thought. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask some questions on asset disposals, please. There is a statement at the bottom of page 533, and it says, as part of the 2024-25 budget setting process, a schedule of assets to be disposed of was proposed. In February 2024, that list of disposals was given to this council, and the value was 10.8 million, just shy of 10.8 million. So far, the assets disposed of amounts to just £30,000 out of 10.8 million. So the delays in the disposal of the assets has resulted in a 528,000 revenue saving not being achieved in 2024-25, and I believe also not going to be achieved in 2025-26. So my questions that arise are, what were the delays to the disposal? How was the £528,000 figure arrived at? And the £528,000 is now in the 2025-26 budget, but this disposal needs to happen on day one, which I think is very, very unlikely to happen. Thank you.
Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do want to start by acknowledging the difficult position that the Executive in. I have a lot of sympathy for relatively new administrations inheriting difficult financial situations. There's one item in particular that I wanted to just clarify. Table 3 on page 520 is the list of recommended savings, which I think I've understood correctly are being carried forward into 25-26. So not like the things that Councillor Holtz mentioned earlier, which have been rightly rejected. But one of the items we are taking forward is a review of the receptions. One of the recent overview and scrutiny meetings discussed digital exclusion, and in that meeting we highlighted the importance of the receptions for the subset of the residents who have perhaps complex needs, struggle to access the online services. When the budget came before the Joint Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Britton was asked to clarify whether a review of receptions meant that we were considering closing the receptions. But at the time, I don't remember the response being particularly clear. So I just wanted to ask again tonight whether review of the receptions means considering closing the receptions, and if it doesn't, can we just clarify that tonight and kind of reduce anyone's concerns there? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just start by saying, perhaps I could congratulate the executive member and officers for producing a plan which actually goes ahead 10 years, which I think is longer than we've ever looked at previously. So maybe it should in fact be a long-term financial plan. But I just wanted to focus in, if it may please, on Charrington's House. At the joint scrutiny meeting last month, we asked the question why East Herts is still paying business rates at £300,000 a year. And this is recorded on page 554 in the statement that East Herts is still liable for business rates until certain conditions of the development agreement have been met. This was raised again at Audit and Governance last week, and the answer the executive member gave was, we're given the wrong advice. So my questions really are, how long can we be expecting to be paying business rates on Charrington's House? But more importantly, perhaps, if we had been given the right advice, would that have given us the opportunity to negotiate the transfer of business rates as part of the developer agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dumont.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something that was brought up in one of the questions, and this isn't a criticism at all, Councillor Holt, but you're raising the questions earlier. I think the words you said, it was a big surprise at some of the things we'd looked at. I'm going to be speaking on an agenda item later about good governance. And we have to rely on our officers, and this is just learning. I didn't understand this when I was in opposition. I'm sure some of your colleagues do, but it's the job of our officers, an RS 151 officer, to bring to us all of the options so that we are fully informed. And I'm sure in the opposition, you want us to be fully informed. And just because something appears on there does not mean that we suggested it or we're encouraging it, or we've asked officers to go and look for things. No, they come to us, and then it's for us as the exec to consider, as your colleagues will know. And for me, they were very much redlined straight away. They appeared on the screen and straight away, no, I do not want to charge for blue badges. That goes against what I stand for. And similar for enforcement, because I see ourselves as a council, you know, we are custodians of the place while we hold our positions. So that would be an absolute worst case scenario. But I would note you didn't mention CAB, which also is in that list that we decided not to cut, but it is something that was cut with your colleagues over the last few years. I think every budget in the last opposition, when we were in opposition. I just want to clarify how that process works.
So pass it away.
Thank you very much. It's a very minor point, but I just wanted to ask on in Appendix C on the list of executive projected savings, just the point around staff paying to use the car park. This is obviously, this is by no means going to solve a budget situation if you're only talking about sort of £3,000 to £5,000 a year. But I do just think, given the parking strategy we just approved, and actually in that conversation around the parking strategy, there was a lot of thought about residents and visitors and no discussion around business owners and staff of businesses who have to use our car parks. They obviously don't get any dispensation to use those car parks to park for work, and they pay this council accordingly. It does strike me as slightly hypocritical, and it may be seen by residents as slightly hypocritical that our staff here aren't also paying to use car parks for their work when we're increasing the charges on business users across the district to do so. And whilst it is small in financial terms, this would increase the surplus by 50% if you did put that charge in. So it'd just be useful for me to understand why that was ruled out as an option by the executive. Thank you.
Chair, we heard about Charrington's House. Paragraph 165 talks about that. This is a really hard pill to swallow, that we're having to pay this order 300,000. I just wanted to remind everybody that the previous administration inexplicably evicted the tenants hugely prematurely, and that we've therefore been losing the income from Charrington's House. That it should still be occupied, still earning income until the rest of the development process has made its way. So that's a burden that's been deposited on the new administration.
Councillor Jacobs.
Another point of detail, I'm afraid. When we set this year's budget, this time last year, we set aside £170,000 for repairs and maintenance on the United Fraud Church Hall in Water Lane in Stortford. I've exchanged emails with Councillor Britton on this, but I cannot understand why that money is going back 2 years. If the survey that's being done on that building in the next few days identifies urgent work that needs to be done, we cannot leave it for over a year before that work's done, just because the money's been put into the wrong financial year. So I would ask that that's reconsidered and it's put into the next financial year, not the one after.
Andrew.
Thank you. At the last executive meeting, we talked about green waste charges, and we were going to be having a breakdown of the costs of that charges. The interim head of strategic finance and property was going to go away and work in that. I don't believe I've seen anything in that. I may be wrong. And the justification for increasing the garden waste charges 20% from 49 up to 59. However, North East Herts' justification for increasing the green waste charges from £49 to £55 was because of a 42% increase in operational costs. I wonder if any explanation can be given for the variances in the charges.
Thank you again, Chairman. Just ahead of reaching my main point, and again taking comments most recently and working backwards, I think one of the things that we're almost mystified by, and certainly very concerned by, is precisely the point that Councillor McAndrew has just made. How we can be in a joint venture arrangement with another council to deal with waste, and then find ourselves in circumstances where it's proposed that our waste charge will be increased by twice as much as that of our joint venture council partner, is befuddling. And this, as Graham has said, this point's been raised previously at executive meetings or scrutiny or whatever it may be. And I certainly don't feel we've had anything close to an answer to that. So I think that's absolutely a point that we are very concerned about. I'm also going to echo the point made, I think, by Eric Buckmaster, which is that even though procedurally, constitutionally, it's been possible for you to do this, it seems absolutely extraordinary to me personally and to us that with this full council meeting just a couple of weeks off, executive decisions were made to push through the increase in green waste charging and also the increase in parking charges. I find it absolutely extraordinary. This is the forum for that discussion. And it really feels as though decisions were made rather deliberately ahead of this evening in order that they wouldn't be discussed this evening. Just quite extraordinary. And then the further point, which I do think is profoundly important, already foreshadowed by Councillor Devonshire, begins with the comment on page 533 of the papers. Asset disposals. As part of the 24-25 budget setting process, a schedule of assets to be disposed was proposed. Delays in the disposal of assets has resulted in the £528,000 revenue saving not being achieved for 25-26. Now, if you go back to the papers for the council meeting round about this time last year, the proposal, which was adopted by this council, was that during that financial year, this council would dispose of assets to the value of £10.8 million. And all that happened is that assets relative to the value of just a mere £30,000 were disposed of. So having said at this council meeting around about this time last year that the administration would dispose of round figures £10.8 million worth of assets, to all intents and purposes, nothing was disposed of at all. And that's where this 528,000 missed revenue saving arises from. If you had achieved that revenue saving, you would not now need to put up council tax at all. The only reason that the taxpayers of East Hertfordshire are being asked by your administration to put up council tax now are because you have completely failed to do what you said you would do this time last year and achieve asset disposals of 10.8 million. In these circumstances, we cannot possibly do anything other than vote against this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoskin?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to, very briefly, a couple of comments that Councillor Deering has just made. I think, and we can supply some more detailed information on this if required. But there are two distinct differences between ourselves and North Herts. One is the number of vehicles that are needed to run this contract. We need 4, North Herts need 3. They cost £215,000 each. And there's an on-cost of running these machines. The second difference is that we have significantly higher and longer routes than North Herts. So again, it's more expensive to run than North Herts. So regardless of it being a joint venture, there are differences within the raw costs of how much it costs us to run this business. There's also, of course, differences in how we recharge our staff and on costs into that. I have no idea how North Herts do it. I do know that we follow Councillor Williamson's recommendations when it comes to that costing mechanism, which was used by the previous administration. Second point I'd like to make on parking is that, you know, as astonished as you might be, this was discussed at great length at overview and scrutiny. It was further discussed at the exec. The car parking charges were distinct and different and labelled up as such within those sessions. So I'm not quite sure where either yours or Eric's comments come about some sleight of hand, or that there is some sort of cynical manipulation here comes from. This has been completely done with transparency in 2 open sessions where all councillors have been invited to take part in. The fact that people don't come and take part is a different issue. But I'd just like to set that record straight if I could.
Thank you. Councillor Copley?
Thank you. I just wanted to say something that's probably going against the mood in the room at the moment, but I just want to say how good a job I think the exec are doing in what appears to be, you know, very difficult circumstances. I've heard lots of comments perhaps coming from the other side of the room about how we are in this position because we haven't disposed of assets, but they seem to have forgotten, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally, that obviously we're in this position because of where this administration has been left by previous administration. They had to make the difficult decision to sell assets and go down that process, which is a lot of work because of the position they were left in. And to suggest that actually now the people sat here are responsible for this and it's all their problem when they're trying their damnedest to sort it out, I think is a bit disingenuous personally.
Councillor Thomas.
Well, I feel like Councillor Copley's kind of took the words out of my mouth there. That's fine. Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of continue with that and just sort of praise the report just in terms of the transparency. I think transparency has been really key when it comes to setting the budget, obviously. And I've had residents, as I'm sure many of you have also had, come to me asking about the budget. People that haven't looked into it and have already asked me, it's going to be hard, isn't it? People, I think, are very sympathetic to the situation that we're in. And once we're able to give residents, you know, potential savings, what's been decided, what hasn't, what our red lines have been, what could be cut, such as contributions to the Citizens Advice Bureau or planning enforcement, jaws are to the floor that we could do such a thing, but we've decided not to. So I think that's really been useful to explain to residents, and us as councillors need to be that, you know, that face. We've got to put the face to the services that we provide out in our communities. You know, I think we're able to explain it better than sometimes just the council tax bill that gets put on people's doorsteps. So we need to be sort of shouting out about that. And secondly, on asset disposals, it sounds bad in practice, but some of these asset disposals are good in terms of being areas which the district council own and maintain that hasn't necessarily been given the TLC that they deserve. So I urge the executive to continue on with asset disposals as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Swainston.
Thank you. I have to agree with both Councillor Thomas and Councillor Copley about how extraordinary some of the comments have been, and indeed Councillor Estop, because it wasn't the current council that decided to close Charrington's House, so there was no revenue coming in from it. Obviously, you couldn't deliver the ORL project in the time that you expected, and some of the assets that you had developed as part of that project have been extremely difficult to sell. So that's another issue. The idea that the process was undemocratic when it had both the parking and the waste strategies have been scrutinised at overview and scrutiny, and there are people from all political parties on those committees. I just find it very extraordinary. I, like others, commend the people who have put really hard work into this and tried to make this as positive as it possibly can be, given the situation that we found ourselves in. Those who have criticised should be fully aware that projects don't always run to time, as the situation with Beam turned out. So, yeah, I do think it's just extraordinary that those comments have been made. With regard to the number of people on the executive, I believe it has increased by 1 since the Conservative administration held it. But why didn't you think about that at the time? When you had the power here, why didn't you think that the executive is too big for the size of the council? Strange that it's suddenly come up now. So I commend the budget. I think it's done a really, really good job in a difficult situation.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I was basically going to echo the comments of Councillor Swainson that I know Councillor Britton works hard, very hard and intensely in everything he does. I think the fact that they've managed to get out a balanced budget after what, you know, the council has been put through by previous administrations is very impressive and should be commended. And I really don't agree with the comments made by the opposition people here. I think, you know, I think I said a while ago, it occurred to me a while ago that it's like you have a gang of bad carpenters fired from their jobs for smashing up the tools, and then they sit across the road at the building site looking at their replacements and criticising them for struggling to cut wood with blunt saws. That's my view.
Point of order, Chairman. I just want to remind everybody we're here to hold the administration to account. And once you decided with a council with no overall control to actually then form a coalition from that time onwards, you are responsible. And it's 2 years in, end of story. And likewise, we did not ask for COVID to happen or the Ukraine war. So we were left with things that were very challenging. But we are here to hold you to account. Thank you,
Another point of order, Chair. It's been said a few times as a coalition, we're in a joint administration. And my understanding of the exec in the previous administration, that it was just one person.
Councillor Glover-Ward.
I was going to make exactly the same point.
Thank you. So, Councillor Britton, would you like to respond to statements?
Chairman,
Oh.
could I have a response to my question on the visibility of the breakdown of costs for the waste contract?
Councillor Britton's about to respond to all the comments, or as many as he can.
Thank you. Yeah, I've written quite a few notes down here, so hopefully we'll get to the bottom of most of these things. I think the first point, Councillor Buckmaster mentioned the executive versus committee system, and yes, it was definitely one of our goals to change that. Obviously, potential of devolution may kind of scupper that, because by the time we actually get round to doing that, we may no longer exist. So that possibly has to be looked at again. Obviously, that's a long-term process. So it's not that wasn't going to happen overnight. You mentioned the green waste and the parking, and yeah, I mean, so hear what you say, but we obviously have a very challenging situation, and we need to find the savings somewhere. And we're presented with a set of options, and we can choose between increasing the green waste or increasing parking charges, or we can cut planning enforcement, or we can cut licensing enforcement. And actually, which is the more important thing to residents? And yes, I'm sure a lot of residents do concern themselves about the charges, but I think they're also concerned about the other aspects that we deliver. So we have to kind of have everything in balance. Councillor Devonshire, a few people actually talked about asset disposals, and yes, that has been a disappointment. And I think the reality of this is that the target last year that was set was probably too challenging. I think Old River Lane in particular, which actually is responsible for probably about 80% of those assets. If you take the car park, the site, and the flats, so all that development is probably 80 to 90% of the value of those assets. So that's where all the value is. At the time, we did not realise that we would not be able to move forward at the point the development agreement was signed. The assumption was that we'd be able to move forward when the development agreement was signed. When that happened, it turned out not to be the case. And yeah, that is unfortunate. But actually, had we have known that, it just would have meant that we would have moved the budget into a future year last year. So it's not that actually money's been lost here. It's just that it was never actually available in the first place. So yes, it's not been a great success, but it actually hasn't really cost any money because it was never achievable in the first place. The delays, well, yeah, I mean the delays really it's about when we were able to progress the sales, and that is, it turns out that's more to do with planning than to do with the signing of the development agreement. You asked about how the saving was arrived at, and that really is about minimum revenue provision. And basically, if we sell assets, we can then pay off debt, and then that debt will reduce the minimum revenue provision through the years ahead. So that's where the money comes from. Councillor Clements asked about review of receptions. I think I would have to come back to you on that one. I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head now whether that was a full closure or just a review and a reduction. Councillor Williamson, Charrington's House. Yeah, so that has been another issue. We are working on trying to reduce the rate that we pay on Charrington's House. I think there are ways that we can do that, so we're looking at that, and that might bring a saving, fairly soon. I think we have to have it reviewed, because we're not using the building. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, historically, had we have had the right advice, would we be able to change the kind of agreement so that it transferred quicker? I don't know. I'm not. That's not really in my field, to be honest. Somebody else may be able to answer that question for you.
I mean, it is quite a lot of money. And I think it's quite an important point. I think, if not now, I think an answer to that question would be most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Angus Wyatt, staff car park. Yeah, it was a very, very small saving, and yeah, obviously, as a council, we felt that actually for the very small saving that it generated, the costs of that to the council actually would have been significant, because yeah, we felt that would hurt the employees. And yeah, I totally get the fairness aspect of that, but I think as a council, we wanted to look after our employees, and that was important to us. So that's why we rejected that one. So Councillor Jacobs, yes, the URC hall. So obviously, if the budget here is an expectation of when the capital expenditure will fall. If we found out tomorrow that building needed a certain thing doing to it, which would cost a certain amount of money that's within our budget, we would look at that and consider doing that. Just because it's in the budget in the future year, if it was needed urgently for a health and safety reason or something like that, we would have to do it straight away. So we will be practical about that, and yeah, we can talk about that at some point online. And so it's gone back to 26, 27 just because that's an expectation, not because that's definitive. We just put in a budget as what we expect to happen. Councillor McAndrew. So you've asked the question which you would have asked almost, wouldn't you, in the members' questions section. So yes, the Section 151 officer is working on the breakdown of charges. I have seen the initial draft of the workings. I haven't got them, but I have seen them. What I can confirm is that the cost of this council of the garden waste service is actually higher than the revenue than we receive from it on the basis of those calculations. And obviously, a lot of that is the indirect cost, which is not it's not just the direct cost of the service provider, but the actual indirect cost to the council of the other services that we have to provide to support it. So I think a breakdown of that money, a breakdown of that will come, but it's still a work in progress, and we've obviously got to go through the detail of that. Fairness with North East Herts. I mean, obviously councils are democratically elected for a particular area. I think every area elects their own council members, and they make their own decisions. There's no requirement for this council to align ourselves with North Herts Council, because that alignment has not actually existed completely. I think when the service first started, North Herts introduced a charge. I think we operated a free service and we brought the charge in later. And I think there have been other times when the charges have changed, when the length of times of those charges applied for have been different between the councils. So there's never been an exact consistency. We also have to think about fairness to our residents. And whilst when you look at this charge, we focus on the people that have the garden waste service and pay their money each year. And obviously it's right that we do consider those. We also have to consider the people who are probably in the majority who don't take the garden waste service. And if we find that we are subsidising the garden waste service, then that is unfair to those people. So we have to consider the other side of it as well, not just focus on the number that are taking the service. And of course, the other thing is, as I said to an earlier question, it's about what the alternatives. You know, we've chosen the garden waste because it was essentially bring it up in line with inflation compared to the original charge that was set in 2021. We were just really catching up with inflation. So that seemed reasonably fair. And the alternative might have been reducing services elsewhere. And I think, you know, obviously everyone's going to have a different opinion, but I think a lot of residents of East Herts would rather have the services, because actually if we lose planning enforcement and we lose licensing enforcement, we're going to have a much worse community. Okay, so Councillor Deering obviously was kind of questioning the procedural aspect of that. These things come through a certain committee cycle. I don't set that committee cycle. You know, so we're doing what the procedure says, and yes, there are opportunities to discuss it, and whether it should be a full council decision or a decision for a committee. That's something to discuss and debate. And asset disposals, yeah, we've obviously talked about asset disposals, and yes, it would have been lovely to have that saving, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It would have made life a lot easier for us had we been able to dispose of those assets. But the reality is, we couldn't dispose of those assets. It was always a target that was unachievable, which we only realised in hindsight. So yeah, we apologise for that, but we are still steaming ahead with asset disposals. We have got currently, I think, £6.5 million worth of asset disposals in the pipeline, which hopefully will come through within the next few months, which is quite a considerable amount of that target, and hopefully we'll see those fairly shortly. I apologise if I've missed anything there.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So this item requires a recorded vote by law. So I'll read out the recommendation to council and I'll hand over to our Democratic Services Manager to manage the vote. So it's A, to approve the budget and medium-term financial plan at Appendix A, savings programme at Appendix C, capital programme at Appendix D, fees and charges at Appendix E, and increase council tax by 2.98%, which will result in a Band D council tax increase of 5.82 to £201.04 per year.
Okay, I'll just read your names out, and if you could just indicate whether you are for, against or abstain. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Andrews. Councillor Boylan. Councillor Britton.
For.
Councillor Buckmaster. Councillor Bull. Councillor Burt. Councillor Butcher. Councillor Carter.
For.
Councillor Clements. Councillor Connolly.
Abstain.
Councillor Copley.
For.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Crystal.
For.
Councillor Dar.
For.
Councillor Deering.
Against.
Councillor Devonshire. Councillor Dumont.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Estop.
Abstain.
Councillor Glover-Ward.
For.
Councillor Hart. Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Hollybom. Councillor Holt.
Against.
Councillor Hopewell,
4.
Councillor Horner,
4.
Councillor Hodgkin,
4.
Councillor Jacobs, Councillor Marlowe,
4.
Councillor McAndrew, Councillor Nichols,
4.
Councillor Parsad White,
Against.
Councillor Redfern,
Abstain.
Councillor Smith,
4.
Councillor Stowe, Councillor Swainston,
4.
Councillor Thomas,
4.
Councillor Townsend,
4.
Councillor Watson,
4.
Councillor Wilcox,
Abstain.
Councillor Williams,
4.
Councillor Williamson,
Against.
Councillor Wilson,
4.
Councillor Wolfe, Councillor Walcombe,
4.
and Councillor Wiley.
Against.
So that's 26 votes in favour, 14 against, and 7 abstentions.
Good, thank you. Thank you. So item 11 is the Capital Strategy, Minimum Revenue Provision Policy and Treasury Strategy 2025-26, found on pages 555 to 602. And I'll invite Councillor Britton to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The capital strategy is detailed in Appendix A. Council is planning capital spending of 10.545 million in 25-26, with the bulk of this for vehicles and bins for the new waste contract. The majority of this spend will be financed by new debt, with smaller amounts financed by external grants and capital receipts, as detailed in Table 2 of the Statutory Report. Debt, however, is only a temporary source of finance, and charges must be made through the minimum revenue provision over the life of an asset where borrowing has supported the asset purchase. Capital receipts can also be used to replace debt finance, and the planned replacement of debt finance is shown in Table 3 in the Statutory Report. Table 4 shows the forecast total outstanding debt finance, known as the capital financing requirement. Note that in 25-26, this represents the peak of council borrowing. Future years should see borrowings begin to reduce as a result of the capital receipts and the minimum revenue provision and the very limited capital expenditure programme. Forecast capital receipts are summarised in Table 5. Some of these will be used to reduce debt. A proportion will be held in reserve as shown in Table 6, and this could be used for the specific costs of transformation projects. Appendix B is the Council's minimum revenue provision statement. Ministry of Housing, Communications and Local Government's guidance requires the Council to approve an annual minimum revenue provision statement each year. New regulations are due to come in force on April the 1st, 2025, but our advisors do not expect the changes to have any significant impact on the Council. Appendix C is the Treasury Management Strategy. The Council has borrowed and invested significant sums of money. It is therefore essential that the Council manages the inherent risks in these activities. The Treasury Management function also needs to manage the Council's cash flows to ensure the correct funds are available at the point when they are needed. The report provides details on external economic factors that may impact the Council. It also details the borrowing strategy and the investment strategy employed by the Council to ensure the financial risks are managed prudently. Treasury management is conducted within the framework of the SIPFA Code, and this report fulfils the Council's legal obligation under the Local Government Act 2003 to have regard to the SIPFA Code. I'd like to propose this report.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Copley.
Yes, I would like to second it and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any comments or questions? Councillor Copley?
Given no one else has any comments, I just want to say I think Councillor Britton has done a great job on all this, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take that to vote. Our recommendation is A, to approve the Capital Strategy, Minimum Revenue Provision Policy and the Treasury Management Strategy 25-26, including the prudential indicators contained within the reports. Could we have a show of hands? All those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? And any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, item 12, council tax setting 25-26, pages 2 to 11 in the supplementary agenda. Note that the report in the agenda was a draft report. So I'd like to invite Councillor Britton to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report details proposals on the setting of council tax for 2025-26. The report brings together the various components of the final council tax bill, the local precepts, the county council and the police and crime commissioner, and simply calculates total council tax for each parish or town. Following the approval of the East Herts District Council budget, we need to formally approve the council tax setting report as per the recommendations.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Horner.
Yes, I will second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Have we got any questions or comments, please? Councillor Deering?
I think we acknowledge that we have to set council tax, but just keeping in mind that we voted against the budget.
Okay, Councillor Horner?
No, I have no further comments except to say that I'm pleased that all of the parishes are named correctly this year. Thank you.
Okay, so we can take this to vote. Again, this is a recorded vote, so I'll read out the recommendation and then hand over to Katie. So the recommendation for council, page 2 of the supplementary agenda, is A, that the council tax resolution as now submitted at Appendix A be approved. B, that the local precepts as set out in Appendix A be noted, and C, that the Hertfordshire County Council and Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire precepts be noted.
Okay, as before, if I call your name, could you just say for, against or abstain? Councillor Adams?
For.
Councillor Andrews? For. Councillor Boylan? Councillor Britton?
For.
Councillor Buckmaster? Councillor Bull? Councillor Burt? Councillor Butcher? Councillor Carter?
For.
Councillor Clements?
For.
Councillor Connolly?
Abstain.
Councillor Copley?
For.
Councillor Cox?
For.
Councillor Crystal?
For.
Councillor Dar?
For.
Councillor Deering? Councillor Devonshire? Councillor Dumont?
For.
Councillor Dunlop?
For.
Councillor Estop?
For.
Councillor Glover Ward?
For.
Councillor Hart?
For.
Councillor Hill?
For.
Councillor Hollybom? Councillor Holt?
For.
Councillor Hopewell?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Hoskin?
For.
Councillor Jacobs? Councillor Marlowe? Councillor McAndrew? Councillor Nichols?
For.
Councillor Parsard-Wyatt? Councillor Redfern? Councillor Smith?
For.
Councillor Stowe? Councillor Swainston?
For.
Councillor Thomas?
For.
Councillor Townsend?
For.
Councillor Watson?
For.
Councillor Wilcox? Councillor Williams?
For.
Councillor Williamson?
For.
Councillor Wilson?
For.
Councillor Wolfe? Councillor Walcombe?
For.
And Councillor Wiley. That's 46 votes for, 0 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 13, the Millstream Business Plan on the supplementary agenda, pages 4 to 41. We need to note that Appendix A is exempt. If members wish to discuss the detail of the accounts, the meeting will need to move into part 2 and the webcast paused. So I invite Councillor Carl Britton to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. East Herts Council established Millstream Property Investments Limited in 2018 to provide a good rate of return on its capital within the range of options available at the time. The council is the Millstream's only shareholder. Each year, Millstream produces a 30-year business plan to the council, and this is provided in the restricted appendix. For several years, Millstream has successfully provided a return on capital. However, during those years, there have been 2 changes that have significantly changed the economic case for the council. Firstly, the council has gone from a position of holding a cash surplus to a position of having to take on debt. Secondly, interest rates have significantly risen over that period. As part of the budget setting process, we considered the case for winding down the council's investment in Millstream. Initial modelling indicating that this course of action would bring significant savings to the council over the long term. The Millstream directors, with the interim Section 151 officer, have modelled the detailed comparison between the financial case for business as usual and the financial case for winding down the business within the restricted report in the appendix. Extracts from this detailed business plan have been incorporated within the public report. The table in section 3.7 of the public report clearly illustrates how the increase in interest rates and the change to council borrowing positions since 2020 and 2021 has caused the investment case to change. While the business still generates an income, the council can now employ the capital used in Millstream to much better effect by paying off debt. This table, however, is a slight simplification because it only looks at the current year-on-year effect and does not take into account the potential gains on the value of properties over a longer period of time, which would only be realised when they are eventually disposed of. The table in section 3.18 of the report considers the overall position over the longer term, including assumed gains in property values over 30 years based on historic trends in the property market. Scenario 1 is the continued business as usual outcome. Scenario 2 is assuming properties are sold and receipts are used to fund vehicles for the waste contract. This clearly shows that over a period of 30 years it is still beneficial for the council to dispose of the properties now, with a gain of roughly £3 million at current values. Whilst the assumed gain in property values offsets some of the reduced income now, it is insufficient to make keeping the properties the preferred option. Scenario 3 also assumes disposal now, but only uses part of that receipt on the waste vehicles, because there is a likelihood that other capital receipts could be used to part fund the waste vehicles, and we have to be wary about double counting. In this scenario, the extra funds receipts are classed as flexible use of capital resources, which could be put towards investment in new transformation projects that bring further savings in other areas. To wind down the business, the intention is to sell the properties when each fixed term tenancy comes to an end, which means disposal could take up to 3 years in total. Given the regular reletting of properties, the company's directors anticipate that in most, if not all cases, properties will be sold whenever a tenant decides to end their tenancy. In other cases, the company would look to give a longer than statutory notice period to enable the tenant to find another home, whilst at the same time inviting offers from sitting tenants to buy the homes. If any household were to experience difficulty securing alternative accommodation at the end of the tenancy, they will be given information about approaching the council's housing service for advice and support. The recommendation to council is that we approve the business plan, which includes property disposal as an option, and also acting as Millstream's sole shareholder, council agrees to use its reserve power under the shareholder agreement with the company to resolve that the company disposes of its properties, and I propose this report.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Horner will second it.
Yes, I second it and reserve my right.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you indeed, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Britton, for your introduction to this paper. For me personally, it's a sad moment. Millstream was part of an initiative we set up to generate revenue for the council. In those days, we recognised that there were tough times ahead for local government. It was a good project, and it's one that did deliver, not both financially, but additionally, it was providing. We were aiming to buy properties that provided housing for rental that were generally hard to find in the private rental sector. But yeah, recognising circumstances have changed. I think the paper does lay out the situation well. So here we are, the end of an era. I think it's most important. I would like to give personal thanks to the officers who were involved with setting up helping to set up Millstream, particularly Jonathan Gill, for the very effective effort he put in over the years, making it such a success. We are where we are. So yeah, just have to recognise the situation, and I you know, with a heavy heart, we're supporting recommendations. I only just have one question really. I mean, is it the intention to actually wind the company up once all the properties have been disposed of?
Councillor Butler.
Thanks, Chairman. I agree. Jonathan Gill did a fantastic job. It was a very complex and complicated thing to explain at times, but actually he did a very good job in doing that. And I think it's an illustration of how agile the council needs to be. And I just want to come back to some of the comments earlier, because we keep being told what people are left with. Decisions were made prior to COVID based on conditions at that time. And of course, interest rates were very low, and what we had invested in accounts earning interest was very low. And this presented a very good option. So this and other decisions were made on the basis of what we knew at that time prior to COVID. Now that things have changed, it's absolutely right that this council should then take the opportunity to change course. And it, as the recommendation says, it's the best course of action, and I would support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Wilson, sorry.
Yeah, not entirely on this topic. Just to come back to what Councillor Buckmaster said. They're saying you made your choices at that time in terms of available information, but at the same time, when you decided to invest in 4 capital projects at once, I recall that the opposition party, which I was a member, decided at that time with the available information that was imprudent.
Councillor Horner.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think with that in mind, I do fully acknowledge that Millstream was set up with a view to making money for the council, and at the time it was a prudent way of going forward. I think it has already been said that interest rates have changed markedly since then, and the situation of the financial situation of the council, whether as a consequence of the decisions that, well, I would say that they were in consequence of some of those other decisions that were made, has deteriorated over that period of time. Now I think it is the right decision for us to dispose of those properties. So I fully support this this decision, and I agree with Councillor Williamson, or I understand Councillor Williamson's point that it is with a heavy heart that we're having to change direction, but I think it is something that we have to do at this time. So.
Thank you. Councillor Britton.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, and yeah, I'd like to echo my thanks to Jonathan Gill for all his work on Millstream, and understand Councillor Williamson's heavy heart. And it's again one of these situations where it's external events, isn't it? And actually, if you trace it back, it actually goes back to the war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine kind of created the spike in energy prices, which drove inflation. It's the inflation then that drove the increase in interest rates. So actually, you know, we can blame the Russians, but yeah. Yeah, I think it is the intention to wind up the company when all the properties are disposed of, and would that be correct? I'm not sure there's any reason to hold it open for any.
Indeed, all I would just add to that, and just speaking as the director of the company, it would just be, I think that would probably be the intention, but of course at that time, if there was any benefit to the council of holding that dormant for some other use that was of benefit to the council, that obviously would be a decision at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's 2 recommendations, and they're on page 4 of the supplementary agenda. Recommendations for council. A, that Millstream Property Investment Limited's 25-26 business plan presented in the exempt Appendix A, which includes property disposal as an option, be approved. And B, that acting as Millstream's sole shareholder, council agrees to use its reserve power under the shareholder agreement with the company to resolve that the company disposes of its properties. So if we could raise your hands, all those in favour, please. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay. We note that members are restless and thirsty. If anybody would like to propose a 5-minute comfort break and we can replenish the water jugs. And a second.
I'll second it.
Is there a vote? All those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Just 5 minutes then, please. Thank you. which is the appointment of a Section 151 officer. And it's found on pages 613 to 616. And I'd like to invite our interim chief executive, Helen Standen, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, as members will be aware, we are required under Section 151 of the Local Government Act 1972 to appoint a Chief Finance Officer. Members will also be aware that our outgoing Section 151, Mr. Linnett, left in December. We have been ably assisted by Matthew Crosby in the interim period. But following an open and competitive recruitment process, the role, full-time permanent role, was offered to Brian Molden, and he has accepted the position of Permanent Chief Finance Officer, Section 151 Officer, and he will be taking up his position on the 1st of April 25. So the recommendation today is that the appointment of Brian Molden as the Council Section 151 Officer and the Section and Finance Officer is approved with effect from the 1st of April 25.
Thank you. And we have a proposer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Brian is currently Deputy 151 Officer at Stevenage Borough Council. He brings a wealth of experience in local authority finance, and I believe he will be a fantastic addition to the senior leadership team. So I'm delighted to propose him as in his post.
I'll second it. Councillor Wilson.
I'm happy to second that proposal, and if we could just extend our thanks to Matthew Crosby as well for stepping in the breach in the meantime.
Thank you. Does anybody like to comment or ask a question? Councillor Deering.
Thank you, Chairman. I just very briefly, thank you from us also to Matthew. You've been very helpful in your relatively short time here. Thank you. And just to say that the Section 151 officer position is obviously very important to every council, so this is an important appointment, and we are very supportive of the selection process. So thank you, Helen.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to a vote. So the recommendation for Council is that the appointment of Brian Molden as the Council's Chief Financial Officer and Section 151 Officer with effect from the 1st of April 2025 be approved. Could we have a show of hands? All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? And any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. So item 15, the pay policy statement for 2025-26 is on pages 617 to 613. I should say that our HR manager, Alex Wanless, should have been here to present the report, but I'll have to hand over to Councillor Joseph Dumont to do it on his behalf.
Thank you, Chair. This is an item that comes to Council this time every year. It's a legal requirement under the Localism Act that we publish a pay policy statement. Annually, this is a document or a policy that sets out the remuneration of our chief officers and of our staff and the relationship between the two. I don't know what the recommendation is, Chair. Is there a recommendation that we accept or adopt?
That the pay policy be approved.
A pay policy be approved.
Can we have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Any questions? Councillor Deering.
I mean, just to say from our side, there are no questions. This is, in the nicest way, relatively routine, so we're supportive. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take that to a vote. So the recommendation to Council that the pay policy statement for 2025-26 be approved. Could we have a show of hands, please? In favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you very much. Item 16, Code for Local Authority Statutory Officers, on pages 631 to 657. And I'd like to invite Councillor Joseph Dumont to present the report.
Thank you again, Chair. Perhaps members are conscious that 10 o'clock's approaching, I'm not sure. This item asks that the Council adopts the Code of Practice on Good Governance for Local Authority Statutory Officers. The code is the result of a collaborative effort by the three representative bodies covering the three statutory roles in local government. SOLIS, the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives and Senior Managers, SIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and the LLG, Lawyers in Local Government. The code focuses on what is known as the golden triangle of statutory roles that underpin good governance in local authorities. The head of paid service, the chief finance officer, and the monitoring officer. Good governance is more than just about policy and process. It is about creating an environment where staff feel valued, robust governance is in place, and where integrity and accountability are fundamental values within the organisation's culture. The Golden Triangle plays a vital role in this by ensuring our structure remains strong and compliant. By adopting this code, we are not only aligning ourselves with nationally recognised standards, but also demonstrating our commitment to promoting transparency, accountability, and leadership within our governance framework. This code has already gone before the Standards Committee and was approved on the 29th of January. And I ask for your support, members, to vote in support of Recommendation A to adopt the code for local authority statutory officers.
I'd like to second the proposal.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Clement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When this code came before the Standards Committee last month, the agenda there referenced a decision-making report that had been produced by the LGA, which had highlighted that the Golden Triangle at East Herts wasn't working as it should. That's a quote. I think that report is at least in part why we're being asked to approve this code of practice tonight. But I do note that the reference to that report has been dropped from tonight's agenda. I don't object to this code. That I think it is a good thing that we have this code. I'll be voting in favour of it. But I do struggle to see how we can be confident that the issues that were raised by the LGA have been raised without having seen that report. And I do worry that the adoption of this code isn't really getting to the heart of the matter. I don't know what the matter is. I haven't seen the report. When the adoption of this code came before the Standards Committee, I asked for sight into that the LGA report, and so far haven't had a response on that. So I was going to take the opportunity to ask again, can we see the LGA report that I think is behind the code that we're being asked to adopt tonight?
I can confirm it's not the reason behind it at all. This is a code that was developed, I think, over a year ago, and Jones will be able to have clarity. It's been adopted up and down the country and by a number of local authorities in very recent times in Hertfordshire. So it's not in direct response to that. But I think where issues are raised within an organisation, if steps are then taken and learning from best practice and adopting policies, I'm not saying in this case, but generally speaking, then surely that's what you want us to do. You'd want the council and you'd want the leadership team to take positive action to try and improve things. So it certainly shouldn't be seen as a negative. You're asking specific questions about viewing the DMA. I'm going to defer to James if he doesn't mind, because I think he can give a better explanation of the situation there.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the code itself has been developed around about July 2024, I believe it was, between the three bodies that Councillor de Monts has mentioned. Since that time, it's gone through various processes. It's been discussed at the Hertfordshire Heads of Legal meeting that I attend. It's then been to the Standards Committee and it's coming here tonight. So this has been in development for a while. Certainly Solace, SIPFA and LLG don't create these things with East Herts in mind, so that this would have come forward or whatever happened. With regards the report that you've referenced, and you're quite right, you did bring that up at the Standards Committee. So some members will know that the LGA did conduct a DMA report for us. The DMA, for those of you who don't know, stands for Decision Making Accountability. So this was done at the behest of the previous chief exec, which was there to help with the formulation of suggested structures for the senior management team. That DMA did identify that the Golden Triangle wasn't operating quite as strongly as it should be, and it was highlighted that that was an area that could be strengthened. Now, the fact that this code has come along at the same time, it is purely coincidence, and I think the fact that this is being adopted nationally at different councils is testament to that. It's already been adopted by at least 2 other Hertfordshire authorities off the top of my head, and there are others that are considering taking it through their processes to get it adopted at theirs as well. With regards viewing the report,
it's not a disclosable document. It was conducted in order to allow the leadership to have a full and frank discussion around what the senior leadership structure should look like, what best suited the authority for today and in the future. And in order to be able to have those discussions, that there requires to be a safe space for officers to be able to have those discussions and to develop ideas, to debate different structures and to reach decisions away from external interference. That there are similar provisions within FOI legislation that covers the same stuff. The thinking being that if public bodies are constantly under the threat of everything that they discuss being in the public, then they might not be able to have those full and frank discussions that are required at organisations. And for that reason, it would not be appropriate to release those kinds of documents. And that's the reason it's not been included, and it was not included at Standards Committee as well. So I hope that provides a bit of background for you on that point. But if you need anything more, then please do let me know.
Thank you. Councillor Crystal.
But just to add to that, I think that one of the key parts of the DMA report is to, as James said, to look at the structure that are in the leadership team and in managements within the council. And I think Helen, as resulting from the DMA report, Helen has been looking at that structure. And so if you're not aware of those changes, I can't quite remember what stage it's at, but I think we will be aware of those structural changes that have come about as a result of that DMA report fairly soon.
Thank you. Councillor Deering.
Effectively, this is a question to James. With respect, James. If I'm right to understand that the DMA report has in some way been referred to in a public domain meeting, I would have thought that any privilege or whatever that may have attached to it would have been removed by reference to it being referred to in a public domain meeting. In order not to discuss this at enormous length in legal detail this evening, I wonder if you could just provide us with a note that is the authority for your proposition that in all the current circumstances this report is indeed privileged, or as you put it, non-disclosable, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I would probably use the term exempt more than privileged, because it's not legal professional privilege that's attached to it. It's more of an exemption.
Just without getting caught up in the fine tuning of precisely what word we're using, you are saying that the report you are not minded to reveal the report. I think I'm asking for a written note that sets out your authority for that proposition, please. Thank you.
I'm happy to provide that.
Okay, any other comments? Any comment, Councillor Dunlop?
No, to support this proposal.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation for council is to adopt the code for local authority statutory officers. If we have a show of hands, all those in favour, please. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. I think we've got several items left on the agenda, so I think we need to discuss whether we should extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock. Do we have a proposer? Councillor Crystal.
Happy to propose.
Councillor Deering. Could we have a vote to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? And any abstentions? Thank you. So that's carried. Okay. Okay, so item 17, we're moving on to a review of the Constitution, which is on pages 658 to 730. And I'd like to invite Head of Legal and Democratic Services, James Ellis, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So as is outlined in my report, the Constitution is kept under regular review to ensure that it's up to date and fit for purpose. As a result of a recent review by officers, a number of changes are proposed, and some are as a result of legislative changes and other are more minor ones in relating to planning. So members may be aware that the new Procurement Act 2023 came into force at the beginning of this week. This being so, the procurement team have undertaken a root and branch review of the contract procurement rules at Section 9 of the Constitution. The new CPR has been designed to ensure that the Council is compliant with UK legislation following that introduction of the Procurement Act on Monday. It makes sure that we're following best practice and achieves value for money in all the procurement activities that the Council undertakes. A brief summary of the changes in relation to the procurement aspect of the changes are up paragraph 2.6 of the report. And also, in addition to the changes to the CPR, there are planning related sections which have also been reviewed. These changes fall into three areas relating to master planning, speaking arrangements as DMC, and minor clarifications, updates to the delegations. In terms of master planning, you will note that the report explains that since the adoption of the district plan in 2018, the majority of master plans for allocated sites have followed the council's approach and been endorsed. For those sites that are coming forward on a speculative basis or where the outline planning permission has been granted, master planning is dealt with via a discharge of condition. This usually means that they have to be dealt with within a certain period of time. If not, deemed discharge is assumed. However, I just need to clarify that there are circumstances where an exemption may apply to these timescales, such as development that falls within environmental impact assessments. But this does not change the proposed changes before you, which provide flexibility to deal with different circumstances. On review of the report, the explanation within it doesn't clarify some exemptions to the timescales could occur, and I think it's important the members are aware that there can be circumstances where there are where these exemptions can be applied. So the recommendations are contained at page 659 of the report. Happy to take any questions that you may have. However, if you want to home in on some of the planning aspects, I do have the head of planning here as well, who is happy to address some of those with you. Thank you.
Okay, and our proposer, Councillor Copley.
Yes. I just want to say, obviously, I'm on the Constitution Committee with a few other members here, and so we obviously all appreciate how much hard work the officers have put into making these changes. I think hopefully everybody has read the reports, but they're fairly straightforward in terms of the procurement changes. Obviously, they have to be done as a matter of law. In terms of the planning changes, also being on the DMC, I'm lucky enough to see those as well, and I think they all make sense, particularly ones where we get to ask more questions in terms of those speaking about a particular planning application, just for points of clarification, whereas previously we were kind of trying to rely on the officers who may not have the relevant information. So personally, I just think all these changes are very sensible, well thought out, and officers have done a lot of hard work. So I'd urge people to vote in favour of this motion, which I'd like to propose. Thank you.
And I believe Councillor Nichols.
Yes, and I'd like to second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Williamson.
Well, just to echo Councillor Copley's point, really, I also sit on the committee, and certainly the changes being put forward are certainly accord my recollection of what we discussed. So thank you, and thank you again for the effort put in by the officers to do this work. Thank you.
Okay, so should we take this to vote? So the recommendation is A, that the updates and consequential amendments to the Constitution identified in the attached appendices are approved. Could we have a show of hands, all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? And any abstentions? Thank you, that's carried. Item 18 is the Community Governance Review, draft recommendations found on page 731 to 824. And I'd like to invite our Democratic Electoral Services Manager, Katie Morgan, to present.
Okay. The Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007 empowers a principal council such as East Hart to review and make changes to community governance within its area. At its meeting on the 16th of October 2024, Council agreed to carry out a community governance review, with the Community Governance Review Working Group being appointed by Council to consider consultation responses and provide recommendations for the review. This report presents the draft recommendations from the Community Governance Review Working Group for approval to send out for consultation. Throughout the review, the Council must take into account the 2010 government guidance and have due regard for any responses submitted during the consultation and be open and transparent. As part of the 2007 Act, the Council must, by law, have regard to the need to secure that community governance within the area under review reflects the identities and interests of the community in that area and is effective and convenient. As per the timetable agreed at the October Council meeting, the initial consultation was carried out between the 28th of October 2024 and 6th of January 2025. And as the initial consultation was wide in its scope, a wide range of responses were received and they are listed at Appendix B. All town and parish councils were emailed directly with a link to the consultation and information was provided to district councillors in the members' information bulletin. The Community Governance Review Working Group met on the 6th of February 2025 to consider the consultation responses and provide a set of draft recommendations for Council to approve for a further public consultation. The draft proposals are listed at Appendix A and maps are included where relevant. The group's rationale for each draft recommendation is provided at paragraphs 2.13 to 2.52. It is important to note that no decisions are confirmed at this stage and the consultation process on the draft recommendations is an essential part of the review and all responses will be taken into account when producing the final recommendations to Council. Should the draft recommendations be agreed, they will go out for a further consultation from the 3rd of March to the 12th of May 2025. The consultation will be widely publicised on the Council's website and social media pages, emailed out to town and parish councils, and any residents affected by a proposed boundary change will be written to. The working group will then meet again in June to consider all consultation responses and propose a set of final recommendations to the Council at its meeting on the 23rd of July 2025. Finally, there is a slight error in Appendix A on page 747 where Councillor Carter's consultation response is missing from the draft recommendations document in relation to Hartingfordbury, but her full response is provided in Appendix A on page 792. The recommendations are on page 659 of the report.
So I'll propose Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams, you're proposing this?
So I was lost. I propose it.
And Councillor Thomas?
Yes, I'd like to second. I reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Would anybody like to comment or ask questions? Councillor Glover Ward.
As a Hertford Kingsmead councillor, I would like to express my joy in the fact that Rush Green Roundabout will end up in one ward. And also as the chair of Kingsmead Neighbourhood Plan, where we tried to get crossings across 2 roads, and that involved negotiating with 2 of the neighbourhood plan groups because half the road was in Kingsmead and half the road was in a different ward. I would heartily say this has my full support. Thank you.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you. You keep missing me. You look the wrong way. Anyway, I wanted to express this view because I've had a comment from Aston Parish Council and they are very disappointed with the lack of interest of the real concerns they have about their community council. What considerations can be given by East Herts to Aston residents regarding the timescale for another review and request a community council again for Hazel Park? I think the recommendation was to leave it until the site was finished, which is really a bit impractical because that would mean there would be an electorate about 3 times the size of the current village, which is overpowering, to say the least. I would suggest that we should consider looking at it at 50% occupation, and I think that would be a good compromise. If you could have your comments on that, please, I'd be grateful, because I've got to feed back to the councils.
Okay, Councillor Parsad-Wyatt.
Thank you very much. In terms of Sawbridgeworth Town Council and its response to this consultation, when the idea of a community governance review was first floated, Sawbridgeworth Town Council responded and said that they would not like to be warded and it didn't fit with the nature of Sawbridgeworth as a community. They stated this in a formal response in August 2024. At the full council meeting here in October 2024, I made representations to that effect as well and said and reinforced the view that Sawbridgeworth did not suit a warded model. A further representation was made by Salisbury Town Council as part of this consultation process in November 2024, when they again restated that position. That position was arrived at by a unanimous vote of the Town Council on a cross-party basis, displaying a kind of consensus across the community. This report now brings forward a draft recommendation to create 4 wards in Salisbury, completely at odds with what the Town Council has said. And it feels very much like the committee here is not listening to what people on the ground in Salisbury are saying. I think, as Kay set out in the introduction to this item, you have to look at the identities and interests of communities. And I think whilst 2.39 on in the report says that this is about effectively is about the size of the town. That Salisbury, for a town of its size, should have wards because other towns elsewhere do, I think does a disservice and doesn't recognise the specific natures and the way that issues are interconnected across Salisbury. We are effectively a town built on a crossroads where issues at one end of those crossroads quite often affect issues everywhere else across the town. So I'm again restating the position of residents and town councillors in Salisbury that we are not in agreement with the idea of the town being warded. Secondary to that, the proposal to ward Salisbury on the boundaries of the existing polling districts or current polling districts, if that were to be taken forward, also doesn't make sense. There is a huge variance in Salisbury between the sizes of polling districts, where we have one polling district which has over 3,500 electors and one polling district which has fewer than 200. To put that in percentage terms, if you were to divide the 12 town councillors on Salisbury Town Council, you would have one polling district or one ward with 6.1 councillors and one with 0.3 councillors. So I think in terms of working out effective, fair representation, if you were to be taking forward a warding model for Salisbury, which again, the people of Salisbury have said they don't want, this particular proposal around the existing polling districts also doesn't make sense. So I'm just restating those positions again. And I know the clerk of the town council has further written to this council again today to really underscore that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, completely agree with what Councillor Angus Parsett-Wyatt has said. This just doesn't work for the town. You know, I've been on this council. This is my 15th year and 18th year on the town council. I can't remember a time when I've had to defend Salisbury as much as I have this evening. I think there would be anomalies as well because of what Angus has just described. You could actually have different numbers of votes in different wards, and it could mean that people in some wards with higher votes are not elected compared to others in a smaller turnout who have fewer votes but are elected. And that isn't the way the town works. I know this council some time ago expressed a desire to have proportional representation. Having a list of 12 councillors when, let's say, there are 15 or 18 candidates is the simplest form of proportional representation, because people just go along and they can choose out of those 12 who they want to vote for, and it works. And I've known over the years, going back when I first became a town councillor, it was really difficult to get people, just like some parish council, to get people to stand. And it's only in recent years we've had more than the number allocated. So I would, and over the years, many of those have been independents. So I think this actually works against the community. If I am permitted under the Constitution to propose that we remove Salisbury from this, I would do that. But I can't vote for that because I would be going against the wishes of the town council, who cross-party, Labour, Lib Dem, Independents and Conservatives have all said this is not needed or wanted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those points. I just wanted to reiterate that these are obviously draft. The initial consultation was obviously a light consultation to see what responses are out there and who wants to be involved. The working group have suggested this as a draft proposal. Doesn't necessarily mean that it will be forming the final recommendations, and it is going out to consultation, and the guidance and legislation states that the council do have to take into account consultation responses. So once it goes out to consultation and the group meets again in June, if there is a majority of wishes not toward it, then they'd have to take that into consideration. So these are no mean final. These are just drafts as part of the process to go through. And it may be that when we come back in July that those recommendations have changed when they do their final set. So I'd encourage them all to respond in the consultation.
Councillor Hollobom.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as it's a draft, and I thank Katie for pointing that out, I would actually recommend, as far as Bishop Stortford Town and Thorley Parish Council is concerned, that we actually include the option B, absorbing the entirety of Thorley Parish, because as it's been left on the map and in writing, we still have this vague little area that comes within parts of Bishop Stortford South and part of Thorley Parish. But really, warding should be along main roads, in my opinion, so you take in the whole chunk of that land. Bishop Stortford South is fast growing development, as many of you know, and it just makes sense, as I see it, that we take in Thorley Street and just don't leave it on its own. Make it part of Bishop Stortford South. Most of the residents come into town, they use all the facilities in the town. It makes sense, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nichols.
I noticed that Buntingford Town Council are also not in favour of the warding of our town, and I welcome the chance for local residents to put their views across, because I might think that it might be contrary to the views of the Town Council. Thank you.
Councillor Deering.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, interesting comments. I think my question, in effect, is to Katie or to all of us, which is kind of where we go with this, because obviously some reservations have been aired this evening. But equally, obviously, Katie, the paper is explicit in referring to draft proposals, and we understand what you're saying. But obviously, the concern amongst those who've expressed reservations is that somehow or other, when it gets to it, these reservations will get lost in the mist of time. So it seems to me that potentially the decision for us this evening is either to defer this paper so that possibly some further work can be done on the concerns that have been raised both sides of the room, or it goes forward but in some way that gives reassurance to the members who've spoken that the points that they've raised, which have been raised, I might say, very, very politely and courteously, but clearly forcefully, are absolutely taken into account as the exercise proceeds. But that's, I think, where we are, isn't it?
Yeah, I would just highlight that when council agreed to take forward a community governance review, it has to be completed within a year. So I would suggest it would be better to take this through to a consultation. Otherwise, we'd have to amend the whole timetable in the terms of reference of the review.
I'm obviously looking right across the room at the various members who've commented. I think it's clearly important that they buy into this. But again, I'm understanding what you're saying, Katie. It may be that the thing that's really important is that we have a very clear minute so that there is no doubt whatsoever that these reservations have been expressed.
If I could comment, I am on that working party. That working party is representative of this council proportionally. I think everybody who's on that group will say we have heard everything that's said. We will also read the minutes and take that back into the discussion to contribute to what comes through in the consultation, and just encourage you to talk to your communities and get them to respond to that consultation. Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you. As I understand, the next part of the process is that it goes out to consultation. Well, perhaps you could clarify this, but who exactly will be consulted? Will it be residents or will it be councils, or how will the consultation work? Just to clarify the process a bit more.
So it will be a full consultation that will be put on the council's website, advertised on social media, It will be open to anyone to respond to, whether that's councillors or residents. And as said, any residents that are directly affected by a proposed boundary change will be written to encourage them to write to the consultation. But it will be for everyone to be involved in the consultation.
Councillor Crystal.
Thank you, Chair. I know that the Community Governance Review Group is meeting, I think, in July, it was mentioned. If I presume that group will then play a role in making the decisions, and if that's the case, perhaps there will be a way of councillors who are very concerned going to that group and making representations to it. So perhaps that could be arranged as one way to ensure that councillors can have a say and make sure they can have a say.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for letting me come back. I'm sorry if I've not got this, but where is the decision ultimately taken? Is it back in this chamber?
Yeah, so the working group will meet again after the consultation to form the final recommendations, and they will be presented to this meeting in July for final agreement.
Councillor Swainston.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to say, I don't see that there's a problem if it's the most democratic thing is listening directly to the people saying what they have to say. And if there's a public consultation, everybody has the opportunity to do that.
Councillor Thomas, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as someone that's on the Community Governance Review, I think one of the things that we sort of kept thinking about as a group was what makes good governance? What makes good governance not just for the council, but also for the residents? As it's been said before, this is going through to a consultation, so not just a decision just yet. And thank you to everyone that's made their voices heard here in the council chamber and also written to us personally and in the formal context. I know some councillors that were emailed about this regarding their wards in particular. You know, as I said, it's about consulting everyone and not just the councillors that it represent. I know we talked about boots on the ground, but the real boots on the ground are our residents. You know, sometimes sort of referring to sort of warding that I know some councillors have mentioned. I'm sure we've all had residents write to us about issues that have happened outside of our district council wards, let alone sort of town council wards for those of you who are involved. And so all I've got to say is we've got another meeting coming up shortly, and they're open to the public and councillors. So I look forward to inviting you all and seeing you there. And also just a massive thank you as well to Edward and Katie, who have been guiding the group so far. Thank you very much.
Okay, right, so let's take this to vote. Recommendations for the council are A, that the outcome of the first stage consultation be noted, and B, that council agree the draft proposals for the community governance review at Appendix A, launching a public consultation on those, noting that the final recommendations will be considered at a future council meeting, taking the results of the public consultation into account. Could we have a show of hands, all those in favour, please? All those against? And any abstentions? So that's carried. Okay, so item 19, motions on notice. We have one motion on notice, child poverty in East Hertfordshire. I invite Councillor Simon Marlowe to present his motion.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that people are drifting away rather quickly, so I'm not going to hang about on this one. But it's a very small motion. There's not a lot to look at, but the figures in it are stark. We have 4.3 million children in poverty in this country. 1 in every 11 living in Hertfordshire and 1 in 20 in this district. To me, that's staggering. In the 21st century that we are in this situation, and it leads me to feel that there's been a complete failure of the political system and civil society that this has come about. We're simply asking that the council resolves to write to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and to the Prime Minister, and that they remove the 2-child limit on payment of all social security benefits, to reinstate the uplift of £20 in universal credit, and C, to pay this uplift to parents under the age of 25 as well as those over the age of 25, which seems like a rather iniquitous situation that's come about. I can't honestly say any more than that. I think it is very stark. I can't believe that anybody would go against it, but I throw it open and hereby propose it for our side.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah Copley, let's.
Yes, I'd like to second the motion, and I'll reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Does any member wish to comment? Councillor Redburn.
Thank you. Whilst I don't oppose the motion, I'd like to highlight that the 2015 start date for this motion is a little misleading, as child poverty began to rise in 2010. Labour governments have traditionally tackled child poverty, and I'm confident that the current government will do so in due course. But of course, I would support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by saying this clearly. There are parents and families in every ward of this district who are struggling financially. There are things that are out of their control that they can do little or nothing about in their current situation. They can't just get a better job. Everyone did that. Who would do the least well-paid jobs? They can't help that utility bills are high, that things cost more than ever. They can't help that house and rental prices have grown out of all proportion to wages. They can't help that this council and the Conservatives, the previous administration, not the last one before that, sold off all our council houses, making it much more difficult to build genuinely affordable housing. And in many cases, they can't help their personal circumstances. They might have had 3 kids and one turned out to be disabled, needing full-time care from one parent. One parent may have died or become in need of care themselves. A business may have collapsed or someone made redundant. It is at these times the state needs to help out. Even when they may have made and are making bad decisions, this is not the fault of the children. What happens to children in poverty? They get worse health and educational outcomes for a start, putting pressure on our services and damaging their prospects. Besides this, many parents may put feeding their children over paying the rent, and from a local angle, this means more people needing our assistance for homelessness or housing needs. The government simply has to pay this money for the sake of the children, but also in the long term, this saves money for the council and the country. Where's this money coming from? Well, this country, far from having a trickle-down economy, has a trickle-up one. The gap between rich and poor is growing all the time. This is unhealthy for a society and its economy. So measures like reforming capital gains tax would be a start. Finally, let me emphasise there are frustrated, disempowered people out there. They are frustrated and stymied by the system at every turn. If we don't help them and make changes, they will lose and often have already lost faith in mainstream politics. And we can just look across the pond to see what happens then. People need to stop blaming people in boats, immigration, and the tofu-eating wokerati. And by the way, I don't eat tofu. And help to change our system so people have some measure of security in their lives. I wholeheartedly support this motion.
Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it is. I wholeheartedly support everything that Councillor Wilson has just said. The majority of children in poverty are from families, working families. The cost of living is really very high, and this is a solution which could improve the lives of many children. It is absolutely crucial that we invest in our children, our young people who are the next generation. If we fail to do that, we fail them, and we fail, you know, the future of this district.
Councillor Parker-Wyatt.
Thanks very much. I think, along with many other members around the chamber, I think reading some of the stats in this motion has been eye-opening, and I think really brings home the reality of the situation. And I therefore would support this motion in principle. As it happens, I'll abstain on this specific motion, not for any reflection of the issue itself, which I think is very serious. But I feel that the motion doesn't seek for this council to do anything other than a write a letter, and the requests are therefore entirely on the national government. I would have liked to have seen perhaps something in there as to what support we as a council could give to support children in poverty in our district. And I think there's, as we've gone through a budget process here this evening, and far be it for me to help the Labour government, I think they will obviously be looking at how they would fund some of the things that we're requesting. And I think there is always a danger of unintended consequences of if they are pulling welfare from one area or pulling funding from one particular pot to do this, then the kind of the ramifications that might then come forward. So I think there's lots of things that would need to be considered. But for me, the main issue is I would have liked to have seen the motion bring forward something that we can be doing as a district as well, rather than just looking to central government. Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Yeah, this is really difficult. And I know that this is really sincerely meant. And, I knew Simon before he was a district councillor. I know the great work he does. It's only the motion, not the aim, that I'm concerned about. What not everybody realises that 2/3 of county council tax goes on social care and 1/4 of it is in children's services. And the fact of the matter is this government and all governments, even previous governments, don't provide enough money. And in fact, the county council now is subsidising the government for special educational needs and has to borrow money in order to do that. So I don't think the government will do this, because what any government, this government, would do is say, well, what would you, same as you have earlier this evening, what would you like us to cut? Now, which other benefit would you like us to take more money from pensioners? They're likely to do that because the government's financial situation. What I would prefer to do is have a working group and actually sit down properly and come up with something that we can all agree with the right kinds of words, and then submit that to government so that we're supporting all of those with special education needs and others to actually get the support they need, because they're not getting it right now. So I will abstain. I was just wanting to explain why I'm abstaining, not because of the principle, but this doesn't do it for me in this particular format. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Crystal.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the motion. I kind of agree with you, Eric, but I think actually, well, let's do that. Let's do that as well. I support the motion. I would be happy to write for what good it can be on behalf of the council. And just on what this council has done, I suppose I would highlight that we've been very determined not to cut citizens' advice funding for our years, and that's one of those things that we've tried to do. We recognise there are really limited things that we have the finances to achieve, but I think protecting citizen advice has been one of those really critical things. But yeah, Eric, if you let's do a motion.
Councillor Clements.
Yeah, thank you. I will be abstaining on this motion for, I think, similar reasons to some of that my colleagues were articulating earlier. It is not the case that the government is doing nothing to tackle child poverty. The government is working really hard under very difficult conditions, similar to the challenges that we are facing here. That the government has limitations as well. One of the very first things that was done when the government came into power was setting up a task force for tackling child poverty. I would like to see them going further. I don't think there is anyone sort of sat on this side who wouldn't agree that we would like to see the government going further. I think people in government would like to see them going further, but they have limitations and are working in a very difficult set of constraints. I'm not sure that us writing a letter to Rachel Reeves or indeed Keir Starmer is going to encourage them to tackle child poverty any more than they are already incentivised to. Like they both, and all of the cabinet, all of the government, I'm sure, are already working as hard as they can to tackle child poverty. And so that's why I'm abstaining.
Councillor Dahl.
I just wanted to say we do, when we can, do bits for children. I'm sure we've given grants for activities and summer holidays. I've seen the Arts in East Herts programme. There were a lot of free activities, and the chair has a tea and tour of the castle coming up for children in chips, and a lot of children with disabilities are in families who are living on benefits. So that is an example of a way in which we can all be actively involved. And it isn't in this motion, but those are examples of what we do. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I really think this is something that's really close to my heart. I work in a school in Benjo, and I think it's really short-sighted to not put children first. I think it has got to be a priority. There is nothing worse than kind of seeing children in school who don't have enough to eat, or who can't learn because they haven't got the absolute basics. And I know that there are always competing needs and competing requirements, but I think every opportunity that we miss to spend money on children, it's so short-sighted, and it just ends up costing more in the long term. I think Councillor Buckminster's idea is lovely. I'd be very happy to work on it with a group on putting something more complex together. I think SEN funding is massively problematic. I think children's safeguarding services are hugely overstretched and underfunded, as are schools. But I think every tiny step that we can take to fund things like this is very important. So I would be really backing it. Thank you.
Councillor Dumont.
Yes, I'd like to say I don't think that the
Councillor
government.
Councillor Marlowe, we'll give you your chance to respond to.
Let the chair.
We'll give you your opportunity to respond to all of it in one go, if you don't mind. So, Councillor Dumont.
Yeah, it's just a very serious issue that's been raised here. It's very, very different to central government. We're not in the same position. We can't raise taxes. We can't make decisions. We're very much at the behest of what central government gives to us. So it's absolutely no comparison at all. But I just think everyone's saying they agree. No one's put down an amendment. Just for once, can we not abstain on a slight technicality on something we can't slightly agree with, and just send a message united as a chamber? Because we sit here and we tit for tat so many times, and these are the kind of occasions where actually we could say, do you know what, this is not exactly the motion I would have written. I would have written it in a slightly different way. But on this occasion, yeah, I'm just going to soak that up and we're all going to vote together. We don't do that enough, and this is an opportunity, Eric and Angus, we could have done that.
Sorry. Hopefully last word, because it's getting very late, but just to say that the Labour government prior to coming into power did make a commitment around lifting the 2-child cap on child benefits. And if a government is anything, they should keep at their promises. There is no point in making a promise and then immediately breaking them. And I'm sure the Conservatives would agree with that. And in which case then, as a council, I feel we should hold the central government to account to be accountable for the promises they make. Also, just to come back on Councillor Buckminster's point, I don't think we should conflate the issues around education, and particularly special needs education, with the issues around child benefits. They're two separate issues and come from two separate places and need two separate responses, although I do support the sentiment most specifically. But I think that is another issue that we don't just confuse things, if that's okay. But yeah, I would support this motion. Thank you. Councillor Copley, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I just want to say, obviously I'm supporting this motion. I don't see why we can't write to central government about this, explaining how, important this is. I just think funding for children is the most important thing. I can't see how you could put that below something else. But at the same time, I do think if we can do something, have a working group with ideas of things we can do. Some things you can do don't cost a lot of money. Sometimes it's just support. I mean, I know from a very personal perspective, I've got a young daughter who's 7, and I'm incredibly lucky that I can provide for her. And I say lucky because people end up in this position through no fault of their own. It really is luck. I mean, I very recently was having a conversation with another parent who's on universal credit, has recently lost free school lunches for their child due to the age group, and has absolutely no idea how they're going to provide food for their child at lunchtime. And that is heartbreaking. So I just think, can't we at least just get together and send a message and then look separately at the other things we can do. This is a first step. I think this is something that we should all be fighting for. I mean, you know, as Councillor Smith said, it's just the most important thing. I just think abstaining on something like this due to technicalities is absolutely ludicrous. We have to send this strong message and then we have to keep going. You don't just do one thing, you step by step and you get there. And I think we all owe this to children in this kind of situation who are in our area to actually do something. Thank you.
Councillor Deering.
Thank you, Chairman. I do myself very much take on board the comments of Eric and I think Angus before him. I mean, just to say to this room, yesterday I presented the Hertfordshire County Council budget for the upcoming financial year. We are committing £290 million to children's services in Hertfordshire. So there is no one in this room that is not supportive of children. I think the question is that we are a district council, and for me, as I think others have said, I would like to see some referability in the motion to what we as a district can do or are doing, and it's not there. Somebody has made a reference to some sort of joint working group. Was it you, Ben? I'm really sorry where that came from. I'm really sorry. That sounds like quite an interesting suggestion to me. So I will be abstaining on this motion for those reasons. But if a working group does come into being, we will be supportive of that.
Councillor Williams.
Just a very short one. Earlier tonight, people abstained or opposed the parking consultation on the grounds of EULAs affecting the most poor people, and are now abstaining on a motion that is just a simple letter to ask the government to reconsider the two-child benefit cap. I struggle to wrap my head around that.
Okay, can we ask Councillor Marlowe to respond?
Yeah, apologies for my faux pas earlier. I think that we're not saying that the government isn't doing anything. I think that would be wrong. I think we're simply saying from the ground up, you can do better and you can do more. And our kids are the people that are going to look after us as we get older, and I'm getting older and I can feel it coming on. So if we've done at least one thing, which is set up a working party here tonight, that quickly, that's fantastic. But I just ask everybody, put your hands up, let's vote for this, let's do it. Let's just let the government know where we stand. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion is set out on page 826 of the agenda pack that you should have in front of you. So could we have a show of hands?
Chair, is it possible to propose an amendment to the motion?
Let's get on.
We've gone through the process.
Okay.
So the motion is set out on page 826 of the agenda pack. Could we have a show of hands, all those in favour? Thank you. And all those against? And all those abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. And that concludes tonight's business. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.
Well done. That was a long one.
Oh my God.
You lost the
Last one. All day I've just been thinking of it. Just got to get through tonight.